Welcome back to World War Now, everybody. I'm your host, Conrad Franz, joined as always by Dmitry Kalyagin here with, I don't just want to say any other evening of World War Now, but this is quite the evening here on World War Now. I hope everybody's been praying about the situation. I know that it's very exciting times. I mean, it feels weird. People might think, I'm like, why are you smiling? Why are you so happy? But I mean, this is something that we've been talking about for a long time on the show. Of course, you all tuning in don't need me to tell you, but for anyone listening later or for a future reference for a historic marker here, we are discussing the ongoing outbreak of war between Iran and Israel, as Israel yesterday evening struck Iran's nuclear capabilities, and Iran has now since retaliated multiple fold here with multiple hypersonic ballistic strikes on Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, across the Zionist entity, the so-called State of Israel, occupied Palestine. And Israel has responded. They are now currently striking again Natanz Israel facilities, other Iranian sites related to nuclear production and missile production, and in general Iranian defense and their offensive capabilities for the region that threaten Israel. The United States and other allies have aided in the interception of the Iranian strikes, and news is breaking actively. So we are, of course, live this evening because if we recorded a show and had it edited, everything we said would, by the time it was released, effectively be irrelevant. So it's good to be live here. I've been going live every Tuesday evening for a few weeks and months now, but Dmitry has yet to join me. So Dmitry, thank you for joining me this evening. How does it feel here in the midst of World War III and the prophesied events that are these Israeli strikes on Iran and the subsequent back and forth we are now in the midst of?
Yeah, it feels good to be here on the show covering all the news live on YouTube, Substack, etc., and of course on X, one of our favorite platforms. I wish Telegram had a live feature as well. It kind of does, but it's not up to speed yet. In any case, I was literally having my coffee. It was still the early morning on Friday, literally dark, but I'm on that grind set, early rise, having the coffee, and you just see the news. And yeah, it was very telegraphed, I have to say that. You could see the tension literally building even from our last recorded episode. And we could already tell maybe this was for real this time. Perhaps Israel was actually going to preemptively strike Iran and, of course, maybe provoke a further conflict. Again, we're still covering the news. It's literally happening right now as we speak. We don't know what the next step will be. We're not quite sure if Iran will retaliate against Israel's allies, who we know have coordinated these strikes, most likely US satellites, long-range drone footage, etc., and the on-the-ground operation. Mossad heavily and actively cooperates with CIA as they took out those, we know they do that, and of course they took out those key Iranian military and science community leaders on Friday. So this is a really big deal, and I don't think Iran is going to let this sort of opportunity go to waste, right? This provocation is clearly being marked by the international community, primarily even the BRICS countries, right? Those sitting on, even countries like the UK, Keir Starmer has called this very concerning. Even Macron has called, has said that both nations should de-escalate. So even the Shabbos goys are standing down. They're not necessarily automatically standing with Israel, because clearly a preemptive strike against the possibility of developing a nuclear weapon sometime in the distant future is not exactly a proper pretext. Some people have been comparing this to Israel's special military operation of sorts, but I think we'll make those analogies and comparisons in a little bit. There's definitely a lot to talk about, and clearly Iran's recent retaliation, the last 2 hours, 3 hours of bombing, has just been incredibly intense. I think there's no denying that we were perhaps waiting for maybe a more measured response from Iran, just like they did last year. But in fact, I think Iran is taking it seriously this time around.
No, it does seem that the cat is sort of out of the bag. Again, I don't know how Israel wouldn't. I mean, we know who these people are. It's the Israelis. They're going to use any sort of any kind of aggression, any kind of perceived slight against them as a place to take 10 steps. They're going to, you take one step, they're going to take 10. And they use the fact that they're considered a much more modern state, much more Western people visit Tel Aviv and these places. So when Tel Aviv is getting hit with these hypersonic weapons, we're seeing these huge explosions. We're going to look at some content here live in a minute. But when you see this stuff, the Israelis are trying to leverage, their relatability as they have, sort of blended in with European society and convinced us all that they are like us, for us to see that and be like, wow, we should support them. We should go to war with Iran, this barbaric Islamic regime. That's what we need to do right now. So that, of course, is what's going on. Of course, initially the U.S. attempted to deny that they knew the Israeli strikes were coming, but Trump has since said, of course I knew when it was coming. And I'm sure in some capacity, at least on the intelligence sharing level, they were very much involved, even though they were insisting that there was no hardware or U.S. personnel involved, despite the fact that, again, they're now involved in the defense of Israel with Iran's response, which Israel knew was going to happen. So in that sense, they were a part of the attack, because they wouldn't have done the attack if Israel didn't know that they would be there to back them up when, the inevitable retaliation that Iran would, level on Israel comes. So again, we're in the midst of this tit for tat at this point. This is the third or fourth round of Iranian strikes on Israel. Israel is now on their third or fourth round of strikes on Iran, which again, they instigated. So whether one of them is going to seek sort of de-escalation at this point seems unlikely. The Iranian foreign ministry and executive offices have all been saying that calls for de-escalation are uncalled for and inappropriate right now. Of course, Trump and Witkoff and these people are still saying that we're hoping the Sunday negotiations with Iran in Muscat, Oman will still go forward, which at this point the Iranians have rejected in the strongest terms. So that is clearly not going to be happening. I don't know what they thought was going to happen there. If they're going to say, we knew this was going to happen, and we hoped that Trump claimed that he thought this would help the Iranians get to a deal and get to negotiations better at this point. So, of course, the things that's been going around in our circles are, of course, the words of Elder Theodore Agiopharagides, the prophecies. Everybody is talking about, what has come to pass that was foretold, as it were. Metropolitan Neophytos, of course, has reiterated the words of St. Paisios, the words of Elder Theodore, the words of Elder Scalactia, the words of Elder Ephraim, and these other saints that we've talked about on many episodes of World War Now and Ether Hour. And I wanted to say, and again, I don't have 100% confirmation on this, but it is true that we know the exact quote from Elder Theodore is, while sipping your morning coffee, you will hear of the first bomb falling on Iran. From that moment, everything will cease to function. The schemes of the New World Order will be upended. He went on to say, and again, I hadn't heard this part of the quote before, but someone cited a quote with a source from an article 8 months ago, hasn't been edited since 2024. Someone checked the metadata, and he said, on that fateful Friday morning, when penetrating bombs strike a nuclear installation in Iran, events will accelerate with unimaginable speed. And of course, if you were in Greece or Georgia or one of these places, it was quite early in the morning, but you could have easily been sipping your coffee. Of course, monastics themselves are usually awake at this time in the morning. So it does appear that with these early morning strikes in the Levant, it does appear that this prophecy from Elder Theodore, who passed away in 2016 on Crete, it does appear that it came to pass pretty much exactly as he was going to talk about. He also, in that same prophecy, it says that around the same time, Erdogan will fall. And of course, on May 22nd, it was announced that Erdogan will not be seeking re-election. And on that same article, of course, he is talking about how he wants to upend and reform the constitution. So some people are saying he's going to declare himself sultan and not have to seek re-election anymore, or create some new office as he does retire. But regardless, 2028, Erdogan is likely out anyway. I believe he's going to fall before then, whether it's because the Israelis get rid of him, he dies from old age, or there is political unrest in Turkey, because Turkey right now is in all sorts of political and economic turmoil. But from a geopolitical perspective, in many ways, he already has begun his fall, as it were, as he announced that he will not be seeking re-election in 2028, or trying to be president again. So some people thought this is him signaling that there will be a new role that isn't president, but it could also just mean he's retiring, as he is quite old. So we're going to be watching that very closely. The next phase, as of right now, does seem to be the fall of Erdogan. But Dimitri, I'm wondering what you think. I mean, we're in the midst of this right now. Are we thinking that there's going to be any kind of ceasefire, or even not even ceasefire, but just a sort of ceasing of immediate active hostilities? I mean, there's been hundreds and hundreds of missiles and drones launched back and forth on either side. Many of Iran's proxies have also been activated. The Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis have been launching missiles, doing their part. And of course, In many cases, of course, in the initial Israeli strike, Iranian air defenses were massively overwhelmed because that was a combination of strikes on the nuclear capabilities, assassination strikes where the head of the IRGC, the head of the Iranian military, the head of the Iranian Air Force, all of these figures have been assassinated. Hossein Salami, many of these people were known as some of the hardliners that had taken up the mantle since the assassinations of Soleimani, the death of Ibrahim Raisi, and of course, we know that Pezeshkian and some of these other characters are much more in the vein of traitors to the Iranian cause and effectively act as, crypto agents for the Israelis, and how moderate they are and how much they are attempting to reconcile with the West. But the Ayatollah does still remain, and many of these strikes, some of these strikes, drone and missile, hit near and I think even directly struck some areas of the compound that the Ayatollah lives at. So there was an assassination attempt on the Ayatollah. The question is Iran going to meet them at that regard and respond in kind and actually assassinate high-level figures within Israel? Because Israeli media is claiming that the Iranian command, all of the military command, all of this was completely wiped out and it's in disarray because of these decapitatory strikes. So what is Iran doing in response, Dimitri? Have they met the Iranians, as it were, on this level? Are they trying to decapitate and assassinate any specific characters? Or, what is happening right now, and what do you think the next 12, 24, 48 hours hold?
It's very interesting. I guess, as always, I'll start with some historical analogies. The Talmudic tribe is known for its assassination attempts, not just, again, the conspiracy which murdered the innocent Son of God, our Lord Jesus Christ, right, at the beginning of New Testament history over 2,000 years ago, but also just throughout history, certain figures, the book which we were translating, Ritual War, covers the relationship between the Shia sectarian assassins and the potential tribes living in the mountains. So they were known for their, so to speak, they were known for their strikes against leadership positions, right? Even in the Battle of Kulikovo Fields, we know that the Crimean Mongols and the Tatars, they were actually aiming to take out Saint Dmitry Donskoy on the battlefield on the 8th of September, when that battle took place. And who funded these Crimean Tatars and all of the Islamic horde that came against the Russian princes and principalities? I think we know that historically. Now it's most likely Talmudic money out of Italy, Genoa, Venice. And it's very curious how even during the Russian Civil War, they took out specific Civil War leaders. Alexander Dutov, the ataman of one of the Cossack forces in the White Army, he was personally beheaded, literally, and his head was brought back to the Kremlin. Tsar Nicholas II and his family, not just the Tsar was beheaded, but probably his wife, Saint Alexandra, as well as maybe potentially even Saint Alexei himself. We have Admiral Kolchak. His body was never recovered, again murdered, between a cooperation between Czechoslovakians and the Bolsheviks. Many, many leaders, the list can go on. And of course, the kidnapped Alexander Kutyopov out of Paris and murdered as well, buried in some unknown grave in France, I believe in the early 1930s, and Eugene Miller, who was kidnapped by the Bolsheviks, taken to the Kremlin, and most likely tortured to death just before the beginning of World War II. So they're known for aiming at essentially, as it says in the Talmud, you have to crush the head of the snake. And I won't continue the next quote, but this is the tradition. And it seems they were successful on Friday the 13th. Again, maybe not an accident, the choice of this particular number and date. A few days before the beginning of the Apostles' Fast, just after Shavuot. But they took out two key, we'll get to the scientists in a moment because what impact that will have, I think, in the long term is fairly significant. But General Hossein Salami, the leader of the IRGC, so essentially he's a veteran of the Iran-Iraq War. This man has incredible battle experience. It would be the equivalent, I don't even know if there are any Russian generals today with as much battle experience as General Salami. For reference, it would need to be a Russian general who literally fought in the Soviet-Afghan War and the Chechen conflict, and again the Syrian war recently. And so this is a very experienced IRGC leader, and taking him out would be the equivalent of if the Ukrainians murdered, for example, Yevgeny Prigozhin and Dmitry Utkin all in one go, in one person, as well as, of course, the other key figure who Israel took out, most likely in his civilian apartment, was Major General Mohammad Bagheri, right? The commander, the chief of staff of the Iranian armed forces. And this is a little bit daunting because when we look at the chief of staff, what does that role entail? He essentially coordinates the various generals and the top military brass of Iran. That is literally the role that Surovikin held when we commenced this podcast in late 2022, and then he was replaced after just before the Prigozhin situation took place in 2023, and he was replaced with Gerasimov. So if Ukraine killed both Wagner, Colonel Dmitry Utkin, and Gerasimov in one missile strike on one day, this is how effective this particular strike was. We'll get to the conspiratorial positions on this. How could this even take place? Because there were all these, for example, a lot of BRICS countries and their proponents on social media, RT, etc. They were pushing this idea that Iranian airspace was impenetrable. All this missile defense system set up, especially around the capital and other key positions. People, there's a lot of cope going around. So how exactly could Israel simply launch missiles from not even Iranian airspace, but they launched these missiles from their planes flying over Iraq? Again, the Americans controlling Iraqi airspace allowed them to do it. Iraq itself, I'm not even sure if they have an air force, most likely not. Just like Syria, they've been completely defanged. We just have to say the Israeli strike was seemingly a success, taking out these top generals, very experienced. The experience cannot be replaced, at least not soon, not urgently. As Israel again is known for targeting sites with civilians. They've done this with Hezbollah when they took out the leaders of Hezbollah and of course the Sheikh Nasrallah himself last year. They killed hundreds of civilians, Lebanese citizens. They took out many innocent Palestinian Gazans. They still do. Frankly, there's 50 to 100 Palestinians dying every single day of the week. It's almost repetitive covering the genocide itself. And just keep in mind, they took out Mohammed Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran itself, and Yahya Sinwar as well. So they do aim for the leadership positions of their opponents, right? In this case, the axis of resistance. Most likely they'll be aiming for the Houthis as well, and probably are actively doing that with their air force, with the assistance of the UK, France, and the US when they were bombing Yemen just a few weeks ago. And that has kind of calmed down for a bit. So we'll see how that progresses shortly. So you're right, Conrad. Decapitation strikes is their signature move. It's been that for hundreds of years, probably since the time of Christ, right? Since the Zealots began assassinating Roman, colonial, leaders, etc. So it'll be very interesting to see exactly how this develops. And look, there's a lot of Russians were mentioning the fact that, look, how can Israel conduct these very effective strikes against targets and we can't do the same, for example, against the leaderships of Ukraine, which is just as terroristic as that of Israel. They've been killing innocent Russians and innocent people in Donetsk, Lugansk for over a decade now. They deserve what's coming to them. And yeah, I think that comparison can be made. Those criticisms can be levied against the Russian military leadership. Why don't they take decisive strikes like the Israelis do? And I think one of the answers here, it's multifaceted, one of the elements would be that, well, Israel is inhumane in the way they conduct themselves. They've killed, in this strike on Friday, confirmed by the Iranian sources inside of Iran, 74 Persians. So these are innocent civilians, as well as at least the 7 to 9 official figures, so military and leaders of the scientific community. And I also think the nuclear scientists are also considered civilians here, because frankly, if you're a science professor and you're designing nuclear reactors for energy means, like you could literally be working, it's like the equivalence of a glorified, well, I don't want to make that analogy, but a glorified gas station worker. You are just attempting to bring energy and economic benefits to your nation, and you're assassinated by, you have no military experience, you're assassinated by an opposing nation which seeks to, decapitate its opponents. Again, a very inhumane, killing innocents. These Iranian strikes, by the way, and this is the comparison, they've killed, at least at this point, the reports are only one Israeli in the last 3 hours. Again, this may change, and we'll be covering the news as we progress this live stream, so that'll be interesting to see. But I don't think it's a good idea, Conrad, to weigh the effectiveness of the Iranian strike on how many Jewish Israelis are slain. I think it's what targets are hit. Most likely, yes, I would say that if Iran managed to take out some of the leadership brass of Israel, then we could deem this a successful retaliatory strike. Maybe the entire event will end. However, I don't think Israel will pass up the chance now that things have escalated, and it seems like Donald J. Trump, and we'll talk about him in a moment, right? The president himself of America has openly stood by Israel throughout this, and he's not made any statements since. So he's kept the radio silence at the moment. We'll see what he says next. I doubt he will criticize Israel. Most likely he'll say something very hyperbolic about how Iran has crossed another red line. So we'll just have to comment on that when it happens.
No, as far as these strikes are concerned, not only were they done from Iraqi airspace, there were even Mossad agents within Iran that conducted this. Apparently, some of the drones were fired from within Iran, resembling the Ukrainian operation Spider's Web that we all recently saw that took out several Russian aircraft from within Russia. So this was supposedly planned for several years. This operation was apparently also originally supposed to go down, I believe, in April, but it was pushed back until now. We're going to watch a clip of me saying that I think June is when this is all going to go down. Of course, there was a massive cyber attack against Iran's missile defenses as well, which is why the initial strike had almost no air defense protecting Iran. The Israelis seemed to completely sneak through, whereas now the air defenses over Tehran and these other places are really active. They're doing a lot better than they were initially. And as of now, Israel's air defense is much more overwhelmed than the Iranians. So we're going to watch some footage here. But before we do, we have a few super chats I want to read. I think for the most part, we're going to read super chats at the end. But if you want to ask us a question, please send in a super chat. It really helps us and supports the show. If you also want to support the show, worldwarnow.co. It's linked down below. You can get behind the paywall, listen to all of our Ether Hour episodes at this point, hundreds of hours of content. We have an upcoming Q&A episode that will be dropping tomorrow. It was supposed to drop today, but we're doing this stream instead, so tomorrow we will drop our Q&A. If you want to ask us a question for our future Q&A episodes, get behind that paywall and pay attention for our Q&A threads. But we're going to read these quick super chats here from the first guys, and then if you send a super chat, we'll probably read it after the analysis and then at the end portion. So our good friend Paisio sends $2. Repent, my friends, World War III is now. He's very correct. Another $2. I was celebrating last night with some beers. WWN. Well, I understand. People might think this gnome hat is celebratory. This is actually my tactical gear. In the Noetic War, as it were. I am, suited up here on the airwaves in my Phrygian cap, my gnome hat. Actually, this hat supposedly has roots in Iran and ancient Persia. So, that's really what I'm representing here. But final super chat we have so far, $49.99, big $50 from Shekel Seeker. Thank you so much, Shekel Seeker. That's a lot of shekels, so we greatly appreciate it. He says, thanks for the coverage, guys. Make sure to stock up on canned beans for the WWN bunker. Unfortunately, as Orthodox, that's probably true. We do have to stack up on some beans, even though beans aren't the best for you. But it's true. You got to stock up. You got to do a bit of prepping. You got to make sure, as St. Cosmas said, you have 2 rifles, so that if they come to take one, you give them one and you retain another one. Have a donkey. Metropolitan Neophytos says this. So be sure to do all of those things. Thank you so much for the super chats, guys. This will go to continuing the content push right now, expanding the proverbial World War Now bunker as I am, currently in. So thank you all so much. But it's time to react to some footage here. There are some pretty wild videos. And again, like I said, it's very shocking seeing these things unfold over a modern city like Tel Aviv. But this is, here we have Israeli Aero ABM interceptors slamming into the Iranian ballistic missiles outside of Earth's atmosphere, so you can see. There's one clip. Then we also have a clip here. Sorry, I gotta switch between the tabs. They're not exactly in order. This has been the big target that was supposedly been struck. Not supposedly, we're about to see video evidence, but as of right now, Iran struck, as this post says, the moment Kiryat, the headquarters of the Israeli Defense Ministry, was hammered by an Iranian hypersonic missile after evading several Israeli interceptors. Let's... And again, apparently when this happened, or around the time this happened, the Israeli military cabinet was actually in the basement of this building. Like, there were many high-level officials. I don't know about Netanyahu himself, but there were many people in this basement. I don't think anybody was killed. We don't have any, 100% confirmation at this point. But these are major strikes. I don't know the exact number right now. I know at one point, initially it was over 300 missiles were launched at Israel. At this point, I think it's far surpassed that. and Israel is reiterating their strikes on these nuclear facilities that Iran has. And I think, again, like you said, Dimitri, now that the escalation ladder has been expanded, the Israelis aren't going to step off of it. I mean, they've been escalating while the Iranians have been showing pretty much maximum restraint with the boot on their neck from the pressure from the U.S., from Israel constantly threatening to sabotage these ongoing negotiations. In spite of that, the Israelis continue to escalate. And so now at this point, the Iranians, they are, of course, calling this operation, they did Operation True Promise 3, and now, and then they're also, the Israelis were calling their operation Fateful Lion or something like this. But the question is, will the Iranians classify this as another? I mean, technically, they didn't even respond to some of the other strikes from Israel months and months ago. So, in theory, they could claim this was a response to that and escalate even further. But obviously, this is the most strikes that Israel has been on the receiving end of. Might be one of the top 3 instances of Tel Aviv and these other cities being struck in the existence of Israel, definitely since the 1990s. So this is very much a big deal. As I said, the prophecies have been fulfilled. I think at this point we should be very much wary for pretty much every day now, because any sort of black swan event could come. I think Russia-Ukraine, we should keep our eyes on that. We should obviously keep our eyes on Turkey. We should be keeping our eyes on China, India, Pakistan, Turkey and Greece as well, what's going on there, the Black Sea and the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, because at this point we are, I think, in the age of these prophecies. And even though Metropolitan Neophytos is being persecuted by the Church of Cyprus, I think it's also no coincidence that right before these things really begin to come to pass, the powers that be started to come after him. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Dimitri, on pretty much, I mean, we're here. I mean, I have to keep checking
The
the
symbolism,
updates right
Conrad,
now
of
because so much is unfolding even while we're recording, but go ahead.
100%, like the symbolism, just that image of Tel Aviv being hit, because for historical purposes, Tel Aviv is built, they chose to build their capital city, the metropolitan of Zionism, right? The metropolis of Zionism itself, on the territory of Gush Dan. That's the CBD, sort of the central business district of Tel Aviv, is where the ancient tribe of Dan was situated in the northern Israeli kingdom. So coincidentally, they simply elected to build their capital where the tribe of Dan was. Again, this is the tribe the Antichrist will come from. How more? And again, Tel Aviv today is the gayest city in the world, as it self-proclaims, right? The mayor of Tel Aviv said so. The LGBTQ plus community, the alphabet community, it also claims that Tel Aviv is the homeland of the gays. It is Pride Month too, so it's all coming together for these people. They are proud of the cultural enrichment they're bringing to the world out of this particular city, which you can almost say this is the most anti-Christian city on earth, right? And I'm not saying that people in the city need to be bombed or anything of that stature, but yeah, the symbolism here is very powerful. Now, Tehran is not in the Bible. Tehran, itself, if Iran, for example, had its capital somewhere in Iraq between the Tigris and Euphrates, then we could, and it was Babylon, then we could say, yeah, this is incredibly symbolic. You have Tel Aviv and Babylon firing it out. But at this moment, the Persians are definitely in the position of the victims. They were struck first, right? And they're simply responding. This is a natural retaliation at this point. We're not trying to moralize this too much, but I think the attack so far has been incredibly measured. As you said, striking at the Israeli equivalent of the Pentagon is probably the best. And mind you, the Israelis were already prepared for strikes against their key military targets. So anyone who is not essential has gone home. We know in Iran for the last 2-3 days, people have essentially, like regular civilians have stopped working. Many people have gone to work from home, etc. So both countries are trying to save as many lives as possible by keeping people sort of off the streets, away from some of these key battle zones. But we do know that other sites around Israel have been hit, including the Dimona base in the Negev desert. Now, this is like that famous base, that's covered in Numek by Ryan Dawson, that documentary about how Israel essentially stole plans for the nuclear weapons from the US. And the Dimona base is one of the bases which JFK wanted to inspect in the Negev desert, and Ben-Gurion, if I'm not mistaken, the Prime Minister of Israel, denied JFK and the US officials permission. So that, in the Negev desert, that is where, most likely in some underground structures, Israel is actually hiding their nuclear missiles, which, there's been a lot of talk about the Samson option or what that may entail. Although we have heard rumors, the Samson option itself, the idea of it, the fact that Israel will bring down the Temple of Dagon that is the proverbial Middle East around them as it collapses, I think it's an idea that was thrown into the mix by the Israelis themselves. So similar to how Arthur Koestler published the 13th tribe, stating that the Ashkenazis are not actually real, they're not a real tribe of ancient Judea or Israel, they're simply the converted Khazarians. Arthur Koestler was an ethnic Jew himself. So we should have to keep this in mind. They like to throw in these big ideas, and then we're supposed to consume them and take them on board. So we just have to analyze all these news we get from these particular people. So very interesting clips. And I would just add again, it does appear that the Iron Dome was working, but it was temporarily overwhelmed. Now, how exactly it was overwhelmed and not entirely clear. If there was internal sabotage, or maybe again, Iran most likely does have spies on the inside as well. If there was any operational shutdowns happening in Tel Aviv and around Israel. And just recall, Conrad, last year in October, I think it was the 15th of October, one of the last final acts of President Biden was to gift Israel, and I say gift, $2 billion to two THAAD defense missile launches, which are worth $1 billion, or valued at $1 billion American dollars each. And these defense missile launchers are probably the best in the world, maybe better than the Russian S-400s. Essentially, they're these massive, I think it's 8-wheeler trucks with a missile launcher in the back that essentially stands up, and I'm explaining this in very lay terms, and they can shoot down any incoming rockets, bombs, even enemy drones or planes up to 150, 200 kilometers away. So they cover a huge radius. Now, if you put, for example, two THAAD missile launchers, or even 10, in a city such as Tel Aviv, they create this essentially a miniature version of an Iron Dome shield. Again, were Israeli U.S. THAADs used in the defense? We're not too sure. And what happens if Iran actually manages to destroy one of these massive trucks? What's that? 1 billion American taxpayer dollars. That again inflates the American dollar, devalues it down the drain, right? So this is a part of the defense of Israel right now is the legacy of Joe Biden. So we just have to keep that in mind. But Trump, I think, is no less eager to protect the Zionist state. I think he's made that very clear recently, especially in his recent Truth Social messages, Conrad. I think they're quite provocative. Like they're almost emotional. There's no real weight behind them in terms of rationality. Notice President Putin, Xi Jinping, even Kim Jong-un, who, and this is a post from Suleiman Ahmed, who, sometimes he exaggerates certain things. He does post fake news on occasion, but Suleiman Ahmed stated that Kim Jong-un apparently said that North Korea will help protect Iran, which, look, geographically speaking, I don't know if Kim Jong-un even has missiles that can reach Iran to defend it against Israel. I'll be completely honest. But in any case, very interesting situation we have here. But symbolically, this is during Pride Month. They were having gay parades in Tel Aviv. Most likely that iniquity has been shut down for a few weeks now because of the, there have been clips of actual people painted in different colors, members of the alphabet community stating that they will be praying for Israel from the bunkers of Tel Aviv. So keeping that in mind. And interesting news from Tehran itself, and I've heard this from Persian friends, Conrad, that because a city like Tehran is... Iran, when constructing a lot of their cities, especially they're so populated, a lot more populous than Tel Aviv itself, there actually are no bunkers. There are no basements like in Texas or Arkansas or some of these other southern states through which tornadoes pass. The Iranians are not as prepared for long-range bombardment and war as some other countries. Even, I would say, Moscow, which has the metro system, all these Soviet-level nuclear bunkers. Like Tehran does not have any underground defense facilities, at least around the major cities. Or perhaps the Iranian civilians, some of the friends I've spoken to, they're simply not aware of them. And that's that's a very cautionary tale, because we know Zionists are not afraid of hitting civilians. We know this because of Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and all the talks about Iran breaching Israeli sovereignty at the moment and Israel breaching Iranian sovereignty. I mean, reality check, these people do not follow international law. They don't follow regulations. The guidelines are for the, silly goy at the bottom. They're for the plebeians, not for these big international state actors. Israel in particular, who have breached the sovereignty of Syria and Lebanon continuously, right? And I'm not going to even mention the Gaza Palestinian innocent people, but the sovereignty of Lebanon and Syria has been repeatedly breached for the past 20 months since October 7th, and they've not answered to anyone. So just keep that in mind. Let's not be surprised if Israel targets more civilian structures in order to take out some of the military officers and their families while they're having dinner or while they're asleep in a city such as Tehran.
No, that's all very true. And I think, again, the latest news, I've got it pulled up right here. The IAEA chief, he tells the UN Security Council that the above ground plant where Iran was producing 60% enriched uranium has been completely destroyed. So these Israeli strikes are quite effective. These are pretty much the maximum that Israel can do as far as its individual effort without, dramatic help from the United States. So they really went for broke on these strikes. It's clear, obviously, this operation was planned for years, how it brought in intelligence, Air Force, all these other things. Supposedly, the Iranian response has involved their submarines. Their submarines have launched missiles apparently against Israel. So this is very much, the modern state of the art of war. We're about to potentially experience things that, weapons, even other strategies that we haven't even seen before. Israel claims that at a certain level, if Iran hits certain civilian things or uh, infrastructures that are for energy and these sorts of things, that one, they're going to respond and hit Iran's oil and gas fields and facilities and ports, but that they also are apparently going to use, weapons that people haven't even seen before. So I'm wondering if we're going to see directed energy, any of these sorts of things, because we're already seeing the cutting edge of drone warfare that we haven't really seen much in the uh, even in the past few years of the Russia-Ukraine war on its own already. So obviously, well, we're going to be talking about some other theaters, but there's just so much going on between Israel and Iran that we could keep talking about it, because Israel is currently still striking Iran, and there are reports right now that Iran has fired another salvo of missiles at Israel. I know one of the salvos apparently contained about 2,000 missiles. So this is high level industrial warfare here that we are broadcasting in the midst of right now. So momentous times that we're living in. But I wanted to show this video for episode 119. I believe this was recorded on May 25th or 26th. And I'm talking about what's leading up to this, the state of the negotiations, Israel's response, and when I think the strikes are going to happen. So I think I think I was correct in this analysis. Iran's supreme leader on Tuesday pushed back against U.S. criticism of the country's nuclear program, saying that Tehran won't seek permission from anyone to enrich uranium and calling American statements nonsense. They say we won't allow Iran to enrich uranium. That's way out of line, Ayatollah Khamenei said during a memorial for the late President Ibrahim Raisi, who died in a helicopter crash last year. No one in Iran is waiting for their permission. The Islamic Republic has its own policies and direction, and it will stick to them. Khamenei's remarks came as indirect talks between Iran and the U.S. reportedly continue, though he expressed doubt about their outcome. Yes, indirect negotiations were held during Raisi's time too, just like now, he said, but they didn't go anywhere, and we don't expect much from the current ones either. Who knows what will happen? His comments reflect Tehran's growing frustration with the stalled nuclear discussions, as well as broader tensions that have defined U.S.-Iran relations in recent years. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Bagaya told the state-run IRNA news agency that no definitive decision has been made about the next round of negotiations, adding that the Islamic Republic of Iran is reviewing the matter while considering the U.S. side's contradictory and constantly changing positions. So, again, this is the current situation. If Trump is willing to extend his deadline that he gave, perhaps maybe they can come to an agreement. But Trump usually doesn't like to have to save face like that. So between Trump wanting to seem like he sticks to his word and the Israeli pressure, again, I wouldn't be surprised if May or June is the month we see some kind of Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear capabilities. But I think we have to move on to discussing the rest. So yeah, I did think that June, I said the summer was going to tell the tale. On other episodes, I said June was likely when this was going down. We talked about Shevuot and these other Jewish holidays, and this time in early June when many of these things happen in context of Ukraine and other events. So I think we were very much on the money here. Nothing ever happens. Cells are having to admit that, okay, maybe a few things happened this week, as it were. And I think even if there is, something akin to a bit of a tone down in electricity and kineticism from this moment right here in the next few weeks on this Israel-Iran front, I think we are now fully into the realm of the unknown, as it were. And as I was saying on the socials, things have been set into motion that cannot be undone. And when it comes to these prophecies, I think that we're going to start to see dramatic upheavals to the current world order and the bringing in of other actors and conflicts into, the center of the world as this is happening, right near Jerusalem, the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, these places. All eyes are on, Middle Earth, as it were. And again, we've got some more content to react to here, and again, more news to break as it's unfolding. But I guess, Dimitri, I want to ask you: is there any, as far as the Russian reaction goes, how are other countries reacting to this? How is this having an effect on other conflicts? I know Israel, in the midst of the strikes, the Iranian strikes on Israel, Israeli jets were still striking Gaza. The Gaza genocide was still going on, despite the fact that Israel was facing one of the greatest threats and missile strikes it's faced in its history, especially regarding the sophistication of weapons it's being hit with, because until now, nobody had hypersonic weapons and missiles to hit Israel with. So the Gaza genocide continued. The West Bank was under complete lockdown. And I think, again, the fact that Hezbollah said they weren't even going to get involved in this latest exchange proves that they have been effectively completely neutered on the Lebanese front. So how are other actors engaging with this, Dimitri? How are people responding? And how do you think, I mean, again, part of these prophecies, and people say that China and Russia are going to be forced to respond in some capacity as this escalates, especially regarding the nuclear component. So what do you think is going on there? How are these other parties responding, and where do you think the next steps are?
Well, it's very interesting. The latest world leader to actually publicly remark, about this conflict currently ongoing is the new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. He states that Canada reaffirms Israel's right to self-defense. Obviously, and I'm sure he would say the same about Iran, right? Of course not. Again, it's not equal. There's pure hypocrisy, and we'll talk about hypocrisy in a bit because this frustrates me the most. I hate two-faced approaches to world affairs politics. This is why this show is a good outlet to discuss a lot of these international controversial moves by politicians. Politicians are inherently, in liberal democratic systems, two-faced. They lie all the time, and we say this even about politicians who we regularly admire on the show or praise. But very interestingly, President Putin allegedly has called someone within the Israeli cabinet, not sure if it was Netanyahu himself or maybe another member of maybe the Israeli foreign minister, and he has also contacted Iran as well. So President Putin has spoken to, or at least maybe Lavrov did, but from what I heard and read, it was President Putin personally. Apparently, Russia is being proposed as a mediator. Xi Jinping and the Foreign Ministry of China, the People's Republic of China, has openly stated that they are willing to mediate. Remember, they said the same thing about Ukraine. And in fact, they offered to become the mediators in the Russo-Ukrainian war all the way back in early 2024, which I think was incredibly embarrassing and humiliating. I don't think the Chinese know what the stakes are in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, especially on a spiritual level, because unfortunately, China is not really known for its sort of respect and promotion of spirituality, let alone Christianity, or what exactly is at stake in Ukraine if the wrong peace deal or the wrong ceasefire is put into place. So it's a good thing they never got involved there. But yeah, same thing for this conflict here. I think Iran very much, and Ali Khamenei for himself, right, the supreme leader, his recent anti-Trump statements has made it very clear Iran is going to remain independent, sovereign. It's not going to allow Israel to bully it, or any country for that matter. And even Iran's sort of, I would say, loose defense relationship with Russia, of course, the sale of Shahed drones, they're not donating these drones, Russia's purchasing them, right? And the other equipment that Iran is selling Russia, for example, military clothing, etc., it's not necessarily going to put Iran into Russia's orbit of influence. Like, Russia's not going to influence Iran to stand down. They don't have that authority, regardless of how many trips former defense minister Shoigu has taken to visit Tehran recently. I think Iran very much is its own sovereign actor, which is why the Israelis are trying to take out Iran, either externally or potentially internally. And we have to mention the Iranian opposition, like who exactly opposes Ali Khamenei and the current hawkish Iranian Shia, and they call it Shia extremist leadership of Iran, right? They do call it like a religiously motivated government, and I have to say it is really, it's less the leaders of Iran, more about Shia Islam and essentially protecting their ummah and their community, more so than, say, some sort of millennia, 4,000, 5,000 year old, since the time Noah came down from Mount Ararat, Persian culture. That was the point of the Iranian religious revolution in 1979. It was essentially to fight back against modernism. It was a desperate attempt at essentially stopping the encroaching liberalization or Marxization of the Iranian community, which, again, the Pahlavi Shah was not able to stop, and the Iranian religious extremists essentially revolted against that. And why I talk about that is because one of the main oppositionary groups, Conrad, the new heir to the throne of Iran, well, we have to call him that, I guess, the crown prince, in exile, Reza Pahlavi, has openly stated on social media he's called for the overthrowing officially of the Supreme Leader. He said the Iranian people are essentially imprisoned, they're taken captive by this extremist Islamic regime. Right, this is even Patrick Bet David has said the same thing. Right, him being of, I think it's Persian or Assyrian stock, like a mixed. So a lot of the Iranian monarchist crowds, and I don't want to call them outright liberals or left wing, they're probably maybe centrists at most. I don't think they're outright liberal. Like, I don't think they would promote LGBTQ parades in Tehran if they were to ever return back to power. However, I don't think they would be very conservative either. And maybe that's the fault. There's a long conversation, I think, in terms of Persian culture, etc. Maybe something we can mention with Alexander Dugin when we finally interview him later this year. But that's one of the oppositionary groups, is those monarchists, and I would maybe call them centre-left, centrists at best. And there's, of course, the hyper-liberal crowd, which exists essentially like a fifth column within Iran itself. These are the people who want Iran. I mean, these people exist in Russia and Belarus as well. They want Iran to turn into Tel Aviv, into the US. They want gay parades. They want, pornography to be legalized, all this other degeneracy, who we cannot support, under any circumstances. It's interesting. I don't think either of these oppositionary groups have the power within Iran to overthrow Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, given his religious authority. He is like a mullah, a mufti type figure. He has religious control plus political control. Like, he's a member of the executive, as much as the president, Dr. Pezeshkian. But we just have to mention this conspiratorial position, Conrad, and maybe I'll read out Pavel Gubaryov's opinion as well, because he's, I think, a prominent Russian right-wing oppositionary leader today and a veteran of the special military operation. I think he's actually writing these messages from the front lines of Donetsk itself. And he stated, this is 10 hours ago, and mind you, allegedly this is speculation by Mr. Gubaryov based on his own sources. He says, there may be a coup taking place in Iran. I'm definitely leaning towards this version. They decided to shut down the internet because spontaneous protests began in the cities demanding the retaliatory action against Israel. To decapitate all key agencies in a single night and eliminate precisely those individuals who are the main support for Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, without internal betrayal from people in high-ranking positions is impossible. That is very curious. And I would, it is true, the IRGC commander, the commander of the Revolutionary Corps of Iran, these are the most radical forces that the elites of Iran have to rely upon, even more so than the actual army, who just conscript citizens and they have like a bureaucratic system. It's to say there isn't an equivalent in Russia, but I would say maybe the forces of the FSO, the federal security apparatus in Russia that protect President Putin. There's basically like a private army of security within Moscow itself and any other object which is part of the president's administration. It's roughly a personnel of 70 to 80,000, maybe as many as 30,000 of them armed, trained former soldiers in Russia, who they are directly under the command of President Putin and his right-hand man. I think there's a certain general who actually operates and commands them, essentially the equivalents of the IRGC. So the IRGC, being the most radical Iranian structure, they would essentially side with the supreme leader over the president if there ever was a conflict between the two. So the conspiracy here is that within Iran, ever since the murder of Raisi, his assassination, and I have to conclude, it's not just our opinion, many people have said that. And when we read Strelkov's particular take yesterday, which he wrote out of prison in Russia, he also concludes that President Raisi was in fact most likely assassinated. We don't know by whom. Was it the Azeris, the Israelis? Was it an internal Persian betrayal? Who knows? But this particular president of Iran was assassinated, and the new president of Iran is a lot more left-wing. Well, we just have to say that outright. And there is a take that perhaps there is an internal changing of power taking place in Iran. The more, shall we say, left-wing people are essentially trying to out the 1979 hardliners, these descendants of the Iranian Shia revolution, in order to normalize not just with the West, but the greater Zog Talmudic globalist community. Because again, when you live under, for 46 years, Iran has suffered under sanctions, external oppression, and countries like China and Russia, despite all their internal, their trades and not sanctioning Iran itself, they haven't really come to the table in terms of assisting Iran wholesale. They haven't given Iran permission or sanction to enrich their uranium. They haven't necessarily provided Iran as much as maybe they could have. So Iran is feeling economic pressure right now. It's not a country which is flourishing monetarily at all. And so there could be that economic motivation inside in order to overthrow the current, I would say hawkish Shia Iranian regime. Now, the Israelis absolutely would use that. And Netanyahu said this in his 10-minute speech. He said, our war is not against the brave Iranian people. He called the Iranian people brave. He said these people are subjugated by this Shia, this regime, he called it. Again, Netanyahu is a mass murderer. This is a Golavarez, as you describe it in Russian. He's a psychopath. We know this for sure. This man does not flinch before he carries out orders, and he personally probably would be shooting people if he had the opportunity, but he had a push of a button similar to Stalin, who signed 15,000+ death penalties personally, execution orders, or like someone like Skryabin Molotov, the former foreign minister of the USSR during World War II, personally signed over 3,000 death warrants himself. Like, these people are straight up psychopathic. So let's not take Prime Minister Netanyahu's words for granted here. So keeping that in mind, we just have to keep our options open as to what exactly is happening within Iran. Well, Pavel Gubarev said here is that there are internet disruptions. That's true. But also, the protests happening in Tehran and other major Persian cities across Iran are not anti-government protests. They're actually protests for more war. They're protests against Israel, against the Zionist entity. So we have to keep that in mind. It's similar to the mass protests and demonstrations which took place across Russia, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Serbia at the beginning of the First World War. If you look at all of those demonstrations in 1914, they were pro-war. So the people want blood, as sort of weird as it is to say, the people want vengeance, and they want their country's honor to be restored, and they feel like bombing Israel would be one way to restore the esteem of their nation again. And I don't necessarily disagree with them. This is a natural state, especially when masses come together. And we just have to counter some of the posts by Jackson Hinkle where he compares, for example, Netanyahu to the Führer of Germany, Adolf Hitler, which I think are completely unacceptable in this case. Why? Because Mein Kampf is a bestseller in Iran. The Iranian people, there's even the Yemenis, Houthis, there's footage of them throwing up Sikh Heils. Like, these people they're not exactly Hinkelites. Like, these people are anti-communist, but like Iran, Persians, they hate communism. They dislike it gravely. Communism is the little Satan, as the original supreme leader called it. They dislike any of this Marxist garbage. Even I think the left-wingers probably would agree here. And we just have to keep that in mind. I think comparisons of Netanyahu to Adolf Hitler are completely misplaced, because the Iranians, they see themselves as not successors of Adolf Hitler himself, but they see themselves as continuers of his work. As I'm just going to relay that as a fact. I'll let you kind of make judgments about what that means. They see themselves as Aryans, and it is what it is. And that's funny because the 60-minute interview, Conrad, a few years ago with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, he compared, I think it was either Raisi it was Ali Khamenei. Yes, he compares the supreme leader of Iran to Hitler. He says, just like Hitler, he wants Iran to be a certain ideology-dominated state. Bin Salman said this. Now, tensions have somewhat fallen between Saudi Arabia and Iran in recent years, but there was that interview. It was less than 5 years ago. You can find it on YouTube. And Bin Salman compares Ali Khamenei to Hitler. So very interesting. I think Hinkle really doesn't understand what he's posting from Moscow, because we know that's an entirely propaganda-run department, which again is pro-multiculturalism, pro sort of Soviet cosmopolitanism. I think that analysis is unrelated to what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, which is clearly a battle between Zionist, Talmudic entity regime. It's trying to expand itself into a greater Israel model, which they've had on their military badges. They've printed out maps. They've openly spoken about it. And naturally, Iran will need to be taken out before the greater Israel project is completely put into power and force across the Middle East. And I think that's part of their goals. And the church fathers, I think, would agree with us. We'll touch on that at the end of the episode.
No, I completely agree. I've got the map and some breaking news here for you, but you're completely right when it comes to Iran and their perceptions of World War II and these sorts of things. For those that don't know, of course, back in, I believe, sometime in the late 2000s, David Duke, E. Michael Jones, and other, known Judeo-skeptics were invited to Iran to speak at a Holocaust history conference, as it were. If you want to see how the Iranians feel about Germans in Germany, just look up Iran Germany 2004 national anthem episode, and you'll see how the Iranian crowd reacts to the German anthem being played. It's, they do a certain gesture. And again, this is just journalism. I'm not endorsing anything. Obviously, unironically, I hope that everyone has peace here. I want things to settle down. But, so people understand what's really going on in Iran here. Here is someone from Tehran. This is a video of someone seeing missiles fly from Tehran from their house. Let's see what they've got going on here. This is what the Iranian people are doing, not exactly what the crown prince and the liberals are looking for, trying to overthrow the mullahs, as they call them. They are, in fact, calling on Iran to escalate and harden its heart against Israel. We're seeing more and more people posting these strap me to a missile and fire me at Tel Aviv memes. But of course, as all of this is going on, I had the live UA map on earlier. Multiple impacts and missile arrivals. The third or fourth, whatever salvo this is, of Iranian missiles have been launched at Israel. Now at northern Israel, touchdowns have been documented in Haifa, all over the Galilee region. Apparently, the Golan Heights and potentially even Quneitra province, Syria, have been targeted in this latest strike. So the Iranians are keeping the pedal to the metal here. This is all very big news. And I wanted to pull up this map as well, just so we all understand where, how this all started, the initial fulfillment of the prophecies. This was those initial strikes that Israel did under the cover of their cyber attack, as it were. This was from the New York Times. Of course, the big strikes on the centers in Tabriz, the Nuclear Research Center, which also has 2 military bases near it. Obviously, many strikes on Tehran, which is where most of the military decapitation strikes have occurred. Multiple strikes on Isfahan, Iraq, and Kermanshah. Those also have nuclear military, missile bases. And then the major strikes now have been on Natanz, which is Iran's main nuclear enrichment facility, as I said earlier, which the IAEA has now reported is completely destroyed. That's where Iran was capable of enriching uranium up to, 60% purity. So this is obviously a big deal. At this point, I don't think Israel is able to strike these sites as much. I know they've done some secondary and tertiary strikes on Natanz, but at this point, most of their strikes on Iran, I think, are on missile silos and batteries themselves, trying to protect themselves and prevent Iran from striking Israel with its full missile capabilities. Because remember, even though the U.S. was willing to even concede at one point small amounts of uranium enrichment to the Iranians, the Israelis didn't just want no enrichment, no civilian nuclear power services at all. They also wanted a complete dismantling of Iran's ballistic missile system, which again, that's completely unacceptable to Iran, because the only reason they're pursuing a nuclear threshold state and supposedly, according to others, a nuclear weapon is so they can preserve themselves and protect themselves from regime change. Again, the Iranians know that if they say they want a nuclear weapon, they're going to be branded a pariah state, a rogue nuclear state, and have the entire world turned against them. Look, the Russians openly say Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, despite being pretty much their closest ally, and have openly consorted with the Israelis, effectively sided almost with the Israelis. Sure, Nebanzaya and these other Russian figures have condemned the Israeli aggression, said that it violates international law, all this sorts of stuff. But I don't see the Russians doing what the Americans are doing. I didn't see any Russian planes taking off from Syria to intercept the Israeli strikes, just like the Americans are taking off from Jordan and these other places to intercept the Iranian strikes. So I don't know what these massive multilateral treaties between Iran and Russia are supposed to do when Russia can just watch one of its closest allies get beat up by the Jews here. But the fact that Russia knows that that's a red line for Iran, that means they can't openly pursue nuclear weapons. But they have to pursue the civilian nuclear facilities and the civilian nuclear power capabilities, because that allows them to perpetually remain in the threshold state category, which means that behind the scenes, it's understood that they would, especially if they have domestic enrichment capabilities, they would, on a short enough period of time, be able to create a nuclear weapon. And of course, this is the perception that Netanyahu has been using for 30, 40 years now to fearmonger against Iran about they're going to have a nuclear weapon in 10 days. They're going to have a nuclear weapon in 3 months. It's always been, since the 90s, it's been the same, the same reiteration. But he's correct in the sense that Iran knows that nuclear weapons and nuclear sovereignty are the only way to prevent themselves from getting the Iraq, Syria, Libya treatment. Because the Israelis openly talk about the only acceptable model for the Iranian nuclear program is the Libya model, which means complete surrender. Foreigners come in and dismantle all of the nuclear capabilities of the regime. And then if you take it literally with the Libyans, then about 10 years, 8, 9 years later, you just get regime changed, and your leader, in this case would be the Ayatollah, gets sodomized in the street on camera, and your country is in this perpetual state of civil war like Libya still is to this day. So, of course, the IRGC, as you mentioned earlier, Dimitri, exists to preserve the spirit of the revolution. That's why they're the hardliners. That's why they answer to the Ayatollah, and that's why they are the targets of the Israeli strikes, because they are the ones that are going to actually be, wanting to do what is necessary, for example, against Israel. And for example, earlier I tweeted out, I wasn't happy with Pezeshkian initially still calling for negotiations somehow to still be met. I said the Ayatollah needs to remove this Kurdish imbecile immediately. Pezeshkian seems to have no other purpose than to facilitate Iran's full capitulation to Israel. So with all of that in mind, I do hope the Ayatollah stays safe. I hope that the Iranians are able to actually call on their allies and do what must be done. And at this point, it's been well over an hour on the stream, so I'm going to read a few of these other super chats before I hand it over to Dimitri. We have to do the rest of the show, so there are some updates from other fronts. We have to bring those up too. But again, still so much news going on right now. We're seeing more exo-atmospheric interceptions right over the Sea of Galilee. It's crazy. Again, like I said, all this is occurring in the center of the universe, directly over where the Garden of Eden literally used to be. So these are quite momentous events. But going back, we have 10 pounds here from Rigovich. Father Peter here has pinned this last night on his video from last year about the prophecy. The day has arrived. Prophecies have become the headlines. It is time to repent and pray fervently. That's true. St. Paisios, Metropolitan Neophytos, said this regularly, that the prophecies will become headlines. So that's what we're seeing right now. It's $10, $9.99 from E. Actually, hold on. $5 from Rooster. Much love from a questioning Prot. Hello, brother. Great work. Ether Hour is very worth it, and I hope the true church rises through these trials. Buy some beans. I guess I will buy some beans. Thank you, Rooster, for the $5. Questioning Prot. Be sure to keep exploring the true church, brother. I'll be praying for you. As a former Prot myself, obviously, I think we should all join the true church. So thank you very much. And for the endorsement of Ether Hour, I hope everyone hears that. It's worth it. Many are saying this. $9.99 here from E. Big Rat, as you can tell by my profile picture, it's Peter Griffin lurking in the shadows. So my question is, how does Team Zog get these Goy cattle banished to the Dark Shadow Realm? Well, I believe this is E-Boss Man himself, who mogged Richard Spencer, Rick and Morty Fauci double cup of lean. So, of course, I'm here in Gnome Hat. I can't endorse Team Zog, but it appears that, unfortunately, many people are trying to mobilize for Team Zog. I'm here in the state of Texas. We've got Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz, pretty much every public figure in federal and state government in Texas is fully behind Zog and Israel. So, here we are, the Lone Star State, as it were, the pentagram on the flag. I guess that's what we get. But thank you very much for the $10, my boy E. We got Paisios. Dimitri, you are our guy. Please be on the streams more. We miss you on the Tuesday show. Politicians are always two-faced. Thank you, Paisios. Dimitri, this is addressed to you. What do you have to say to that? People are wondering why you're leaving me out to dry on Tuesday evenings.
Paisios, I'm more of a listener, less of a speaker, actually. I think one of my strengths personally is that I can listen and take in information very well. My ears fully functional. In fact, I think more than the average person. So I actually take in information and memorize it when I hear it. And I love listening to Conrad, his analysis. I bring a lot of that spirit onto our typical World War Now weekly recordings. And yeah, so I love being a member of the audience. I'm a natural, I'm a natural memer. I'm in the comments. I'm, posting support. And yeah, I completely agree. Maybe one day I will come on if the timeline works out in this next coming few weeks. I think, I'd love to, of course, join Conrad. The streams are quite epic. I don't know if I would collaborate with the ethno-guesser. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a biologist. So I think I would maybe even give wrong recommendations, Like, my understanding of ethnicity is, a little bit flawed. I don't have that, that pure, the white man's vision of what exactly... Yeah, anyways. I won't go into too much depth. But
I don't know. Maybe we'll have to do some at the end of this stream. Maybe we'll have to do some live.
Oh, yeah.
Another $5 from Paisios. I don't think it's a coincidence that all the Goys are focused on the No Kings protest instead of literally the most important event in our life. Well, at this point, I think everything is sort of connected at this point between, anti-based protests, everything going on, even the Carmelo Anthony stuff, everything is just in chaos and discord. The spirits of the air are having their way, and things are being confused, and things are getting God is allowing things to get worse because unfortunately mankind has not repented for its errors, for its sins. And Eldris Galactia talks about how the sexual sins of man, both within and outside of marriage, the satanic rituals and the occultism that's going on, as well as the failure to love one's neighbor and these things. Those are the things that are dramatically leading to the escalation of World War III, and it's why we are going to be forced to experience the events that we are going to experience. But of course, right now, more and more strikes on the Iranian army's armored brigades in the city of Zanjan. The U.S. Navy is now repositioning its assets to defend Israel. The destroyer of the USS Thomas Hoodner is moving to the Eastern Mediterranean. 8 additional destroyers are available in the 5th and 6th fleets, and all sorts of other assets are being moved around the region. Of course, we now understand that all of the evacuations from Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, all these bases, we know why that happened, because now there's a chance that they'll strike the American bases there. It's clear why the Americans are trying to maintain the perspective that they did not help in the initial Israeli strikes on Iran. But again, the Iranians know that the Americans are the ones that are helping shoot down their attacks right now. So I don't see why the American bases are off limits. I hope that they don't strike the American bases, but at a certain level, I can't see why they would, continue that, I guess, that show of restraint, as it were. So, we're seeing more and more of these big interceptions of drones, of missiles very high up in the air. So I'm wondering what the missile count will be at the end of all of this. But Dimitri, are there any updates from Russia, Ukraine this past week? I know that everything's being overshadowed by what's going on in Iran, but I do know that Russia was still making some large advances, and I'm curious to see how they will. I mean, I'm actually we won't know probably for a little bit, but I'm wondering what exactly happening right now. I'm just curious on the front lines. I'm wondering if the Russians or any side is taking advantage of the sort of confusion as these things are unfolding in the Middle East.
Well, as we speak, and speaking of the news from the last week, Russia has been making significant gains in the Sumskoye Oblast, right? First and foremost. So right now, as per Oleg Tsarev, former Ukrainian politician, now very pro-Russian blogger, I would say, one of the people I trust, because I think frankly, if Ukraine was to still remain an independent sovereign state, he should probably be the president of Ukraine. The man is very orthodox, very pro-Russian. He's also pro, I would just say, Slavic unity in terms of East Slavs, Belarusians, small Russians, and Greater Russians together. So Oleg Tsarev actually reported that Sumskoye Oblast, the Russians have been expanding the buffer zone, very interestingly, reaching up to 25 kilometers away from the city of Sumy itself. And this ties very closely into the Diocese of Sumy, right? So which belongs to Metropolitan Yevlogius, who I would say is a confessor of the faith. He's actually been targeted by the Ukrainian Talmudic regime, by Zelensky and his cabinet. In particular, I think he's faced some minor house inspections, things like that. Maybe he's been even taken to court, if I'm not mistaken. So many Ukrainian bishops have been persecuted recently that you essentially lose track. But Metropolitan Yevlogius of Sumy has put out a statement that if Russians take the entirety of the Sumskoye Oblast, including his own diocese, he will remain loyal to Metropolitan Onufriy, and he will not join the greater Russian church under the Moscow Patriarchate, like the diocese of Lugansk, Donetsk, and Crimea. Very interesting statement of loyalty there. I think he's probably stating that in order to first and foremost protect his own flock from reprisals of the Ukrainian terror state. We know there are Ukrainian militias, these Banderites created all over Western Ukraine, but they could as well be transferred to Sumy in order to keep cohesion in place, to keep the Russian Orthodox Christians from rising up in the city of Sumy itself. So the Russians are making huge progress in Sumskoye Oblast, which is very reminiscent of World War II, when the Russians started pushing back the Third Reich around these same regions after the Battle of Kursk. So it's all very analogous, sort of, so to speak, historically, except that the Soviet army in the Second World War was a lot more effective. So we just have to keep that in mind in terms of how exactly it was conducting its affairs. The Russians have also, again, been shooting down Ukrainian drones all week. Again, there hasn't been anything exceptional in terms of Ukrainian drones targeting Russian military facilities, oil refineries, civilian targets as well, energy sectors in all kinds of Russian oblasts here. Ukrainian drones have been flying quite far, like reaching the borders of Kazakhstan, as you can imagine. And frankly, in one of the posts we made on the World War Now Twitter, we actually mentioned, the X, we actually mentioned the fact that if you measure from Donetsk to the borders of Kazakhstan, it would only be roughly around 300 kilometers, right? About 200, 180 miles. Not a very long distance. These Ukrainian drones can fly very far. And notice the Iranian drones, by the way, fly over 1,000 kilometers from Iran all the way to Israel. So, the drone technology has improved dramatically. There's big news about oil prices surging to $80 per barrel of crude oil. So JP Morgan actually predicted just yesterday that there's potential rise to $130 American per barrel in the event of escalation, which would be a huge boon and benefit to, well, not Ukraine, but Russia in particular. So just keep in mind, Russia, like as much as it relies on gas prices, it also relies on oil sales, and the Gulf states are going to benefit from this. Again, the Arabs and any country who sells oil are huge beneficiaries of what's currently happening in the current conflict. And I'm not going to say that these countries are necessarily aligned against Iran. Well, in the case of Russia, clearly it's not, but the Gulf states are. They're not simply doing it for economic gains, but this is an auxiliary element that we need to just keep in mind when we discuss the broader sort of geopolitical scope of what are the benefits of these nations potentially aligning against Iran and with Israel. It's because, well, they're going to economically benefit. They're going to have larger budgets. Their salaries will go up, etc. Like very materialistic, worldly considerations, right? They're not really thinking about prophecy, the clairvoyance of saints. They're not thinking about, Christianity, or even, I would say, the eschatology of Islam when they're, taking these things into consideration, which is very, very unfortunate. Remember, there were those rumors in 2011 and 10 when Dmitry Medvedev was the president of the Russian Federation that the reason Russia did not help Gaddafi is because, well, if Gaddafi was to be taken out and gas supplies to Europe would be disrupted, at least on the North African end, Russia would benefit and Europe would rely more on gas sales from the Russian Federation. And this sort of conspiracy has been circulating for the last decade or so. So you have to keep that in mind. A lot of the Russian elites are very much not focused on spiritual, or shall we say patriotic benefits to the nation. They're mostly, again, thinking about money, economic gains. A lot of them are frustrated at the fact that a lot of their assets, including estates, yachts, overseas accounts, are frozen. And I would say it's very interesting because the Ritual War chapters, which we've been translating on the Substack, they actually mention the fact that there's this Talmudic tradition which Yaakov Brachman mentions in his book, the Book of the Kahal, which Dostoevsky actually read, by the way. The Book of the Kahal was the first exposition of Talmudic two-faced approaches to economics within the Pale of Settlement and the Greater Russian Empire. This was published in, I believe, the 1850s, before the Russian Empire fell apart. And the Book of the Kahal describes how the Talmudic community, including the rabbis, actually manipulate the economies of the Goyim in order to benefit themselves, right? Dostoevsky, frankly, actually officially has read this book. Many Russian patriots, Konstantin Leontiev, all kinds of thinkers, read this book exposing the two-faced and hypocritical nature of the Talmudic community within the Russian Empire and the Pale of Settlement. Just mentioning that Yaakov Brachman himself was an Orthodox Christian. He was initially a Talmudic Jew himself. I believe I'm not sure if he came from a family of rabbis, but he converted to Orthodoxy and he became an Orthodox Christian and a very patriotic citizen of the Russian Empire, lived under Alexander II, III, and Nicholas II, and he loved the monarchy. So interesting that you do have people from that particular persuasion, of that ethnicity, that convert entirely ideologically and spiritually to the faith. So that gives us hope. Not everything is lost, and wow, this footage is absolutely incredible. Looks like something out of a movie, and I'm shocked that Tel Aviv, the defenses weren't up. It's almost as if, again, the Iron Dome can be overwhelmed. I think Hezbollah and the Houthis jointly have sort of shown that. And keep in mind that the bombing of the Ben Gurion airport a day, less than 24 hours before Israel's strike against Iran, I think is also very telling. We're just keeping that in mind. Funny that Netanyahu did not use the Houthi bombing of the Ben Gurion airport as a pretext The pretext officially was that Iran has not negotiated appropriately and that it has begun developing nuclear weapons, and this was a preemptive strike. And keeping that in mind, and I'm going a bit off topic here, before I read this letter by Igor Strelkov, which I think is a great transition into the greater geopolitical scope, we trust his analysis as much as our own, I think. Igor Strelkov, I've been personally following him for over 10 years now. Conrad has too. Everyone who is familiar with the Russo-Ukrainian war since 2014 has been following his words. He's a pious Orthodox Christian as far as we know, and he's a great patriot of Russia. So in relation to Trump, the five rounds of negotiation, Conrad, right? The fact that they've been stalling, essentially preparing, collaborating with Israel, right? Planning to strike against Iran this entire time. And essentially they were, Steve Witkoff in particular, maybe he was lying. Like, we know he prepared jointly with the Israelis, the peace talks, the ceasefire negotiation agreements that he proposed to Hamas, which Hamas rejected last week, or more than a week and a half ago now. Just keeping that in mind, if you recall Minsk 1 and 2 between Russia and Ukraine in 2014 and 2015, Angela Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, she officially, with the hot mic in late 2022, she openly stated that the Minsk agreements were completely fake in their nature. All they were meant to do was stall Russia's cultural and military expansion into Ukraine and essentially freeze the entire conflict to assist Ukraine in preparing for the greater, war that was to come. So this really does explain to us that some of these Western Zog-owned, Zog-slave countries in the West, including Germany, the US, Israel, when they do carry out these massive negotiation, these diplomatic visits, these discussions with their enemies or their potential opponents, sometimes they will outright lie, and they will just simply give these propositions as a way to stall in order to then carry out the actual strikes against the enemies that will have impact. So now to read the letter by Igor Strelkov, I think this is very telling, and it'll be interesting to see his analysis, because mind you, he's one of the, I would say, the most right-wing, outspoken Russians on Telegram at the moment. So this is his letter dated Friday, 13th of June, 2025. He wrote this in prison, by the way. An attack on Iran had long been anticipated. I believe that without the permission, coordination, and direct support of the US, Israel would not have undertaken anything of this magnitude, especially not on such a large scale. This is clearly not a limited operation, considering the number of casualties amongst Iran's top military and political leadership. Iran will, of course, respond, and in my opinion, is already doing so. Well, he was correct here. And he continues, overall, we are witnessing the beginning of a major Middle Eastern war, in which Iran's position is very weak. Why weak? Because Israel's excellently prepared the ground for its assault through a series of successive actions. First, they removed the Iranian president who supported Syria and Assad. I think he's mentioning Raisi here. The next Iranian president withdrew troops from Syria, which greatly weakened the Syrian government's position. As a result, within 2 weeks, Syria was devastated and destroyed. Most of it came under Turkish control and a significant part under Israeli control, including the strategically important Golan Heights. Now, Iran essentially has no viable means to reach Israel via ground operation without entering into a direct confrontation with Turkey. And Turkey has a very strong army, making it extremely difficult for Iran to fight it. Now, Israel, naturally using its significant superiority in missile and air power, is striking Iran without expecting a serious or a truly painful, serious retaliation. As if Iran does take some action, the US, which stands behind Israel, may join Israel, seizing the opportunity to crush Iran once and for all. And the letter continues. What does this mean for us? By us, he means Russia. This poses two main threats for us. First and foremost, the closure of our southern corridor, since we actively transported oil and other raw materials to India and other countries via Iran. This was a fairly important route for us. Now the only remaining eastern transit option for us is our exports to China. Secondly, of course, as Iran continues to be struck and loses more and more industrial facilities, it will no longer be able to supply us with weapons and ammunition that it previously provided, which will also affect the course of military operations. I completely agree with this analysis, and yes, this could be This could be another tactic of weakening Russia's position in the Middle East, because Iran is one of the only remaining nations, and I wouldn't count Turkey as a pro-Russian nation at all, given that it is literally a member of NATO. Keeping this in mind, Iran is one of the last allied countries to Russia. The Gulf states are pro-American. Israel is pro-American. Egypt literally is on America's payroll. And Syria, well, this plays into the greater scope of the Islamic problem within Russia, the Sunni-Shia split, and the reason why Russia may be even less inclined to support Iran in the coming war if it escalates further, Conrad. Because keep in mind, al-Shara, al-Julani, HTS, former al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, these people are supported actively by the most elite members of Chechen society. So these are the Chechen, former people who formerly supported Basayev, the Black Arab Khattab, Jahar Dudayev, and all the other Chechen people. You can find photographs of Ramzan Kadyrov standing with Shamil Basayev together in the same photograph. His father, of course, Ahmad Kadyrov, which is why I don't personally say Ahmad Silla, because that's absolutely crazy. Like, Ahmad Kadyrov was known for murdering Russians during the Russo-Chechen wars, especially the First War. And yes, he did in fact repent for his crimes later on, and he was forgiven by the Russian state. But this is a very tainted history, in my opinion. These are people who've collaborated with Wahhabi imports from Saudi Arabia amongst the Chechen people. So Chechnya is pro-HTS, it's pro-al-Jilani. If, for example, and we have to keep in mind, someone in the comments mentioned, will they turn Iran, by them I mean Israel and the US, if they turn Iran into this failed Iraq, Libya type state, and it'll be disrupted by ISIS infiltration, etc. And they try to claim maybe a new ISIS will arise, some sort of pseudo caliphate type model. You have to keep in mind the Sunni Muslim extremists, the extremist Salafis and the Wahhabis will benefit from this. And if, for example, HTS in Syria is mobilized, especially those Turkmen, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Kyrgyz, Kazakh extremists who have been essentially exiled out of their own home nations. There's up to probably a few tens of thousands of them, these mercenaries who are currently stationed. They were murdering Yazidis, Christians, Alawis on the west coast of Syria. These people have no home at the moment. They're not exactly, I think, these are like the pirates, right? The pirates during the 17th century. They don't really want to integrate into normal society. These are psychopaths, bloodthirsty murderers of Christians and other minorities. They need a new target, and they hate Shia Muslims. They can be sent across the border through Syria with the blessing of America, of course, the blessing of Donald J. Trump and the Israelis. They can be sent into Iran on the ground, Mad Max style, in these trucks and other things that were provided to them by the West, unfortunately, and probably Israel, into Iran in order to fight on the ground. And yes, if they're all sacrificed, that would probably just benefit Syria and Turkey, because these people have no home. You can't really, these are like the early Bolsheviks, you can't reintegrate them into regular society nor the regular military. These are essentially just bandits. And who exactly will the Chechens support, right? Would they support Shia Iran? Or would they support their co-religionists, the HDS radicals from Central Asia and from Syria, and these Arabs who the Chechens associate with very closely? Yeah, so big consideration. I think a lot of, despite the absence of Middle Eastern experts amongst the top Russian cabinet members, like unfortunately, Vostokovedenia, the geopolitical analysis of Middle Eastern affairs, has drastically declined in Russia since the fall of the USSR. The Soviets actually had professional sort of foreign ministry experts on the Middle East who could speak Arabic, they could speak Farsi, Turkish. They were invested so heavily into Middle Eastern geopolitics back in the day. Now the quality has dramatically dropped. And I'm just wondering if they're taking into account the allegiance of these radicals within Russia itself and the potential radicals, right? These Sunni Muslims, how would they react to Russia's support of Shia Iran against potential philo-Semitic pro-Israeli Sunnis who would be mobilized against the country they hate the most? By the way, they claim that Assad, being an Alawi, Alawis are essentially a sect of Shia Islam, predominantly. They view Iran as being responsible for those Assad gas bombings because Iran was an ally of Assad back in the day. So there's all the complicated analysis that comes into here, I think, is probably why Russia has so far stood on the sidelines, and why in the next week or so, or even as this literal conflict continues, hours and hours even after this recording, why Russia may not get involved right away is because even at home, and even notice that over-reliance on the Chechens and the Russian Sunni Muslims, even in the propaganda PR space, despite the fact that they make up probably less than 5% of the actual Russian army. Their actual contributions to the SMO, to the war against Ukraine, is greatly exaggerated. It's greatly overhyped in the media. I think this is one of those considerations which many people are just not really focusing on. The fact that the majority of Muslims in Russia are actually Sunnis, and the most militant Sunnis are not pro-Iran, at least not religiously. So this is just that additional aspect to the conflict, which I think is worth covering, because nobody expected Central Asians, many of which who could speak Russian, right? It's Tajiks, Turkmen, Uzbeks, to travel to Syria to overthrow Assad's government in December last year. And yet that's exactly what happened. So just keeping that in mind.
No, I completely agree. And I have this map pulled up, of course, of Netanyahu and his plane that fled to Greece. Because remember, the next sort of stage of the prophecies here is Erdogan falling and eventually the clash between Russia and Turkey. Strelkov's letter, of course, mentioned how Turkey's army and its presence in Syria prevents the Iranians from having any kind of ground route towards Israel to confront them in any capacity. So Turkey is very much coming into play. Erdogan obviously is becoming an enemy of Israel, but Turkey is still Israel's fifth largest trading partner. They're still facilitating the Azerbaijani energy subsidy of Israel. And in general, again, despite effectively bordering Israel in many regards, they have not really taken up the mantle, as Iran has with these enormous strikes, to even defend their own sovereignty against Israeli influence, let alone do anything for the Gazans and the Palestinians, who are, of course, currently being genocided. But I think we need to really think about the context with Greece and Turkey and how, I mean, what if, Turkey invaded Greece and justified some of its assaults on these islands because it was housing Israel? What if Greece's support for Israel and everything actually, led to Turkey intervening in that regard? And of course, St. Paisios and others, they also prophesy the liberation of Cyprus, that the Turks will come to Cyprus briefly and then be forced to retreat, that they will invade Crete, I think Lesbos, Rhodes, a few other islands before ultimately being forced out by the Russians. And regarding the Iranians in Syria, the Russians in Syria are also, going to come and play an important part. And I think we should probably watch. I can find the clip on my profile of the prophecies of Saint Philomenos from, as recounted by Metropolitan Neophytos. So, yes, I can pull those up here in.
Well, while you're pulling that up, I just want to mention the image that Conrad has pulled up on screen essentially shows the Wings of Zion, the Air Force One plane of Netanyahu. Apparently, it flew out of Tel Aviv shortly after the Israeli strikes against Iran in a precautionary measure. Maybe it had members of Netanyahu himself, as well as members of the Israeli Knesset or the cabinet aboard, and it flew where? To mainland Greece, not even to Cyprus, because Cyprus is, if you look at that map, still close, maybe within range of Iranian drones and missiles. So it looks like Greece is the trusted ally. Again, most likely, we know Greece is very heavily subjugated to the Freemasons and Talmudists. We saw this at the beginning of 2024 when even Archbishop Elpidophoros from GoArch, he visited Mount Athos in January, and a week later he visits the main Holocaust Museum of Thessaloniki, and he gives a very philo-Semitic speech. So we know these people dominate Greek society as well as in many other countries around the world. So very curious that Greece is seen as a trustworthy safe haven, this NATO country. And yes, Conrad, you're right. This could be used again by Turkey in the future. This could be taken down as well. Greece is supportive of Zionist, anti-Islamic, tendencies, and again, as a pretext in the future, Greco-Turkish war. Unfortunately, Greece is putting itself into a very precarious position here.
And when you consider the fact that the prophecies talk about Kurdistan emerging as an independent state and Armenia expanding in the midst of this sort of Turkish defeat, we can take into account that Iran has been interacting, of course, with the border of Syria, with Iraq, into Kurdistan, and how, again, the ongoing negotiations between Turkey, the SDF, and the USA are still yet to be decided in the midst of all of this Israeli-Iranian shakeup. So we could see some redrawing of the map. I have the St. Philomenos video here, which we are going to watch shortly, but I'm going to read the super chats that we have received in the past few minutes since our last update. $2 from Paisios again, my second favorite part of the show, Russia/Ukraine. Of course, the past few months, it really has been the Middle East block, followed by Russia-Ukraine, followed by miscellaneous stories, followed by church news, but that's not necessarily hard and fast, but I'm glad you enjoy those segments. Thank you, Paisios. We've got $20 from Chaz Connor. Thank you, Chaz. Everyone needs 6 months of food. The war has begun. St. Paisios says it will be 2 years. Great famine's coming. West Coast will need to get 1,500 feet up, I've heard from trusted priests. Many lands underwater in America. I think that is a very likely thing to occur. We talked about this on our Q&A segment that's going to be released on tomorrow morning. So if you want to get behind the paywall, you'll get access to our full Q&A episode where we answer all sorts of amazing questions from the audience about prophecies about America, Western Europe, monasteries in World War III, our perspective on, an Orthodox geopolitical outlook, our perspective on Grand Duke Serge, our perspective on Metropolitan Sergius, of Sergianist fame. So really big episode coming up. Be sure to get behind the paywall or even just subscribe as a free subscriber at worldwarnow.co, which is linked down in the YouTube description below if you want to get access to all of our content. So thank you so much, Connor. Fantastic advice. Everyone should be stocking up. We've got $9.99 here from Aaron Earhart. No question, just thank you for the reporting. As an Orthodox inquirer, I just want to repent, join the church, and live the Christian life. Please pray for me. Thank you, sir. Pray for us as well. I hope you can get received into the church because, things are getting crazy. So I hope everyone can securely begin partaking of the sacraments, repenting, praying, doing whatever you need to do. Thank you, Aaron. Your financial support is greatly appreciated. And $5 more from Paisios. Strelkov is a saint, if not only the Donbass, but of the future Russian Empire, the first true Orthodox general of the modern age. I think we can agree with that assessment as well. I wish we could get in touch with Strelkov. I hope he gets out of prison sooner rather than later because he's somebody that we would definitely really like to have on the show. But with all of that, let's tap in. I know real World War Now patriots will already be familiar with this, but for those that aren't already, really everyone needs to know. I believe this is one of the most important prophecies about what is going to occur in the Middle East between Russia, Turkey, Iran, Palestine, Israel, Cyprus, everything going on there. I think St. Philomenos really, it makes sense that he would be the one to prophesy this, as he was, of course, martyred by Zionist Jews in 1979 for protecting, his site in the West Bank and Palestine, the Jacob's Well, where, Saint Fotini met with Christ, the woman at the well. So let's check this out.
Ξεκινήσαμε να μαζεύουμε στοιχεία για το βίο του Αγίου Φιλουμένου και πήγαμε στα Ιεροσόλυμα. Εκεί, στο Πανάγιον Τάφο, με προσέγγισε ο Αγιοταφήτης Μοναχός Παντελεήμων, όσοι έχετε πάει, είναι ο φύλακας του Παναγίου Τάφου. Και μου είπε, σε παρακαλώ, γράψε δεσπότη μου στο βιβλίο που θα βγάλετε για τον Άγιο Φιλούμενο. Ο Άγιος Φιλούμενος, πώς ξέρετε, είναι Κύπριος από την Ορούντα και εμαρτύρησε στο πρayerful το 1979. Αρνούμενος να φύγει όταν τον επίεσαν σιωνιστές Εβραίοι να εγκαταλείψει το προσκύνημα εκεί που για 2.000 χρόνια ήταν χριστιανικό. Παρέμεινε εκεί το προσκύνημα και μία νύχτα προχερή 2 φανατικοί Εβραίοι με πέλεκι τον εσφαγίασαν. Αργότερα το Υψαλόν του ευρέθη αύφορον, ευωδιάζων και πολλά θαύματα επιτελών. Εμείς λόγω της σχέσης του τόπου, η Ορούντα ανήκει στην Μητρόπολη, πήγαμε με τις μοναχές της Μονής του Αγίου Νικολάου Ορούντας και μαζέψαμε στοιχεία. Ανάμεσα σε όλα αυτά ήταν της Εξής, το οποίο λέει την κατάληξη όλων αυτών των γεγονότων που ήδη άρχισαν να επιτελούνται. Ακούτε πώς το καταφέρει ο πατήρ Παντελεήμων. Όταν ήμουν ακόμη λαϊκός, αναφέρει, ήρθα ως προσκυνητής στα Ιεροσόλυμα με τον κύριο Δημήτρη Παναγόπουλο, τον γνωστόν ιεροκήρυκα. Τις μέρες που ήμασταν εδώ ξεναγός στο δικό μας λεωφορείο, ήταν ο πατήρ Φιλούμενος, ο κατοπινός ιερομάρτυρας Φιλούμενος. Τη μέρα λοιπόν που θα επισκεπτόμασταν το όρος Ταβόρ, μόλις πήραμε τον δρόμο από τον οποίο φαίνεται η ευρύτερη εκεί περιοχή μας, είπε, παιδιά μου, θα σας πω κάτι το οποίο εσείς θα ζήσετε, αλλά εγώ δεν θα ζω για να το δω. Μέχρι εδώ, στον κάμπο δηλαδή του Θαβόρ, θα έρθει ο ρωσικός στρατός. Θα κατέβει από τον Κάφκασο. Προσέξτε αυτήν την λεπτομέρεια. Ο Κάφκασος είναι η Γεωργία. Και θα κάνει πολλές καταστροφές. Ο σκοπός του θα είναι να φτάσει στα Ιεροσόλυμα, αλλά εδώ θα σταματήσει. Δεν θα επιτρέψει ο Θεός να πάρει παρακάτω. Αυτό πιστεύω ήταν μια αποκάλυψη που έδωσε ο Θεός τον Άγιο εκείνη τη συγκεκριμένη μέρα, μια και ο ίδιος ήταν αυστηρά οδηγόλογος και όταν μιλούσε μόνο για να οδηγήσει τους ανθρώπους στον Χριστό. Αυτά ο Άγιος Φιλούμενος έναν χρόνο πριν το μαρτύριόν του 1978. Κάτι άλλο. Δεν ξέρω αν έχετε διαβάσει ένα βιβλίο που δύσκολα κυκλοφορεί, ενός Αγίου της Γεωργίας. Ακούσατε προηγουμένως για τον Κάφκασο. Ότι από εκεί θα ξεκινήσει ο μεγάλος πόλεμος. Είναι ένας σύγχρονος Άγιος της Γεωργίας, ο Όσιος Γαβριήλ, ο διαχριστός Σαλός, ο οποίος εκοιμήθη ένα χρόνο μετά τον καιρό Παϊσίου, το 1995. Διάβασα μια προφητεία του που λέει «Αχ, Γεωργία, χώρα μου, θα λιώσεις σαν λαμπάδα το υγρό σου, αλλά μετά θα οξαστείς, μετά τα ερήπια που θα προκαλέσουν». Όταν τον ερώτησαν γιατί θα λιώσει η Γεωργία σαν λαμπάδα, από εδώ θα περάσουν τα στρατεύματα των Ρώσων για την Τουρκία. Άρα, περιμένουμε όλοι έναν μεγάλο, τεράστιο ρωσοτουρκικό πόλεμο.
So there's that, prophecies of Saint Philomenos of Jacob's Well and Saint Gabriel of Georgia. Very, of course, relevant saints to this region. And of course, they're going to be the ones that are going to be talking about all of this. Of course, the actual fate of Iran when all of this happens, I mean, it's really begun for them now. I'm sure they will last for a time. I don't know what the fate of the regime will be. Obviously, in the farther future, as the conflict goes on, there are prophecies about China and Asian troops marching across the Middle East towards the Euphrates. So obviously that would involve them crossing, the Persian mountains and these sorts of things. So I think all sorts of things are in play at this point. And the question I think that becomes now, where will the next stage of escalation in the prophetic timeline be? Will it be more things in Ukraine and Russia? Will it be more things between Israel and Iran? There's rumors that some of the Turkish stuff could be escalated when things occur in the Balkans in tandem with things, in the Caucasus and the Middle East with the Iranians. So obviously everything going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's a reason we've been staying so close to the ground on that, because it's very relevant here. Obviously, like I said, Russia, Ukraine, everything going on in Crimea. The Turks have always been involved on the side of Ukraine in some capacity, even before the SMO began in 2022. The Turks initially were providing Ukraine with more drones that the Russians were becoming concerned with, which is actually part of the reason why they launched the SMO, because they felt that drone parity was becoming more and more of an issue. There's, of course, also the Chinese issue with Taiwan. I've always said that one of the ways China could help Iran would be to take some of these Kinmen Islands or even move on Taiwan itself. But the Chinese know that on the longest timeline, they're getting reunited with Taiwan peacefully. So the question is, how much do they need Iranian oil? How much do they want to help them out? And I think, at this point, I'm very interested in how the Russians are going to respond to all of this, both on the battlefield and regarding their both diplomatic and public facing, as well as their behind the scenes support for Iran. Unfortunately, I can't see the Russians supporting Iran too much beyond moral support, as it were, which in this game means less than nothing.
That's right. But someone in the chat did mention correctly, and we are reading the analysis in the chat. There's a lot of good stuff there. Thank you for the contribution. It's very eye-opening. Russia and China, especially Russia, I would say, but China as well, because again, if Iran falls, the last great Shia power, essentially dividing the central, and you can say Pakistan, as well as the Central Asian Sunni Muslims, and the influence that Wahhabism, extremist Salafism brings from the West will be gone. And the land route linking the Uyghurs, right, in Xinjiang province to, essentially Arabia will be completely open. We have to keep this in mind. Not just the Straits of Hormuz, but even the land route. If Iran is, again, either divided as they probably wish to do, divide Iran into some similar to what they plan to do, most likely with the Russian Federation, if their plans come to pass. This will cause a great instability in China, I think, in the long term. Again, the enemies of mankind will most likely utilize the Sunni extremist Wahhabi factor in China in order to, again, have some leverage over the Chinese people in the long term, despite the fact that China, of course, trades with the West very, shall we say, openly at the moment. They're great allies. And the other consideration, it's not just the Central Asians and Syria, Conrad, but Azerbaijan. Very interesting. This news was kind of now almost in the past. The news cycle is so quick. But just a few days ago, Iran's top foreign policy advisor said that the Iranian government has successfully blocked a proposed land corridor that would have connected Azerbaijan to Turkey via Armenia's Sunyuk province, warning that the project posed a serious security risk and a threat to isolate Iran from key regional routes. Now, the senior advisor to Ali Khamenei stated that it was, he called it he referred to it as similar to the Zangezur corridor, and he said that essentially Azerbaijan tried to link itself with Turkey once again, and Iran cannot allow this to happen. And we just recall a few months ago, Iran has had IRGC trainees working together with Armenians. And if you could think of a country that Iran, not by religion but by ethnicity, by common history, was linked to, it wouldn't just be Iraq, right? Of course, historically, Iran and Iraq really didn't share a border, right? It would be Armenia. Like Armenians, before they converted to Orthodox Christianity under Saint Tiridates III, the king of Armenia, they were Zoroastrians. So you can almost say that Armenians in some capacity are, by ancient ties, also tied to this greater Persian family. And this is most likely why I think Iran will, despite the fact that Azerbaijan is majority Shia, I think there's very connection to Israel, as well as very questionable ties to Turkey through that Turkological factor, that greater Turkestan potentially project that they're trying to build, which hopefully Central Asian countries will not cooperate with. Leads Iran to rely more on Armenia rather than Azerbaijan, and also just Ilham Aliyev being this sort of two-faced character, right? He's very similar to, I would say, Erdogan, just as skilled. I mean, his father was a top KGB agent. He himself has links to the intelligence community, and I think, notwithstanding close ties to the top Talmudic Kabbalists, right? He married his daughter off to the son of Aras Agalarov, right? This is a top. Look, it's worth looking up. We've mentioned this a few times, but essentially Azerbaijan is almost seen as this, not a neo-Khazaria, but essentially a derivative of the ancient Khazarian Empire. Azerbaijan is seen as this. And just keeping in mind, like, historically speaking, and I'll read an excerpt from, this is actually from the book recently translated into English, but we also on our World War Now Substack will be translating it into English from Russian, slowly but surely, chapter by chapter, with all the citations, as well as contextual guides for the readers, because the book is incredibly dense. Russia Before the Second Coming by Sergei Fomin. So this essentially highlights some of the history happening here between Iran, that Middle Eastern region, Euphrates, Tigris, Iraq, and Israel itself. So the citation follows: after the second storming and capture of Jerusalem, the site on which the Jerusalem temple stood was plowed over and sown with salt by the Romans. Truly not one stone was left upon another, according to Matthew chapter 24, verse 2. In the Talmudic writings, we read, from the day the temple was destroyed, the gates of prayer have been closed. An iron wall was erected between Israel and their heavenly Father, according to Talmud Berakot 32b. A portion of the Jews set out for the countries located to the north and east of their homeland: Syria, Armenia, Georgia, Babylon, and Persia. According to the rabbis, the flower, that is, the gems of the nation, went there. The majority of the families of the tribe of David settled primarily in Babylon, from which, of course, the Talmud originates, and the surrounding provinces. Historians of Georgia and Armenia confirm these accounts of the Jewish rabbis, acknowledging that the Jewish element predominated in Georgia from the earliest centuries following the dispersion of Israel, and the royal house of the Bagrations, the Bagratids in Armenia, hence Bagratione, took pride in its descent from the kings of the tribe of Judah and bore the harp of David in their coat of arms. So if you look at, the main Georgian royal house historically has always linked itself to the house of David, And that's not because David sent one of his sons, or this is somehow linked to Solomon like the Ethiopians did, but that's because a lot of the Jews migrated as refugees, asylum seekers, essentially to that Caucasus region through Persia. So very interesting connection there. And these Jews, unlike those who migrated west of Jerusalem, came to be known as Eastern Jews. Their leaders who traced their lineage to the royal house of David adopted the title the Princes of Captivity, or Eshmalotarchs, or Exilarchs. Interesting sort of title. So there was a early on, almost pre-Talmudic elite that existed out there in the East. And we know that eventually some of them most likely converted the Shia assassins to some of their ways. And eventually they migrated north, as we know the Khazarian history. Who converted the Khazarians to Judaism? It was these southern elders, these rabbis that came through the Caucasus Mountains, mingled among the Turkish princes and kings, and then eventually converted them to not just Old Testament, faith, but already an existing Talmudic Judaism. So that link between, of course, Iran, ancient Israel, Judea, the province of Palestine, and all those lands is very interesting. And a lot of the early church fathers, even pre-Nicaea, when they, for example, talk about out of which country will the Antichrist emerge from the tribe of Dan, but clearly like what nation, they say it will be the spiritual Babylon. But for the Talmudic Jews, we spoke about their prophecy about Armilus, for example, the Orthodox Christian emperor, king that the Antichrist will need to slay. For them, this is very important. Notice the maps of Greater Israel always include the ancient territory of Babylon, where the Tower of Babel was built. They're very much obsessed with this particular region of the world. They do want to expand further on into Iraq. This is their goal. It's not just Syria. They're not going to stop at that. They do want to link essentially themselves to deep Old Testament history. And that's, I think, very important. And the only way they can do that, and notice Saddam Hussein is gone, the Arabs are essentially leaderless or entirely proxies, is Iran. Iran needs to be completely defanged, neutered, whether it's through a liberal revolt within Iran itself or through military means. And this is most likely the religious aspirations of these people and probably the motivations, I would say. Even if we view Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, as just a psychopathic secular leader, we have to understand there are people behind him as well, as there are behind all of these so-called liberal democratic decision makers.
No, that's completely true. I want to remind everybody to send in a super chat if you want us to answer your questions. We're probably going to not go too long after 2 hours. So thank you all so much for tuning in. It's been a fantastic stream. The chat has been fantastic. Been loving reading what everybody's been saying. Have some more updates here, of course. That's how this stream has been going. New words from Donald Trump. He posted on Truth Social. I gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest of words to just do it. But no matter how hard they tried, no matter how close they got, they just couldn't get it done. I told them it would be much worse than anything they know, anticipated, or were told, that the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world by far, and that Israel has a lot of it, with much more to come, and they know how to use it. Certain Iranian hardliners spoke bravely, but they didn't know what was about to happen. They're all dead now, and it will only get worse. There's already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make this slaughter, with the next already planned attacks being more brutal, come to an end. Iran must make a deal before there is nothing left and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. No more death, no more destruction. Just do it before it is too late. God bless you all. So it's clear that the messaging Trump has sort of imbibed from the Israelis is that we're going to strike Iran really hard. You just have support for us. You just tell the Iranians that it's going to get even worse from our strikes. You're going to keep giving us weapons, and then they'll probably still come to the negotiating table. At this point, I think that ship is long sailed. I don't think Trump is fully aware of the situation. And again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the negotiating table will be occupied once again, but I really don't see how that happens. And if that does happen, then I think we can confidently say that, perhaps the conspiracy that you were mentioning earlier, Dimitri, where certain elements in Israel are collaborating with certain elements with the current Iranian regime to completely assassinate, much like Soleimani, Raisi now, Salami, all these other high-ranking IRGC officials, to completely have the only people left in power in Iran be, these moderates, these reformists, these people that want good relations with the West, that perhaps could even phase out the leadership of the supreme leader and the Ayatollah, which, if that's the goal, then they're going to have to assassinate the Ayatollah himself, or perhaps the goal is to isolate him so much politically that he is forced to sort of step down. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. The recent strikes in Israel are at the site of Rishon LeZion, or Lezion, I don't know how you say it, which is in the south of Tel Aviv. Direct hit on multiple buildings by Iranian ballistic missiles. Again, at this point, we're at, probably 3,000 plus ballistic missiles from Iran launched at Israel. The Israelis are not going to just treat this as something that can be, oh, it's just another step in the escalation ladder. Both sides are openly talking about being at war. The Israelis are saying they're at war with the Iranians. The Iranians are saying they're at war with the Israelis. So that's what's happening right now. The Israel-Iran war of 2025 is ongoing. And again, I consider this just, as of now, the most kinetic front of the Third World War, even though technically Russia-Ukraine is still where more people are dying. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on, the potential conspiracy angles on this, Dimitri. Obviously, it seems that the Iranians are taking this seriously. We're going to have to see how many Israelis, the death toll at the end of this could let us know how, planned or not planned some of this was. But I do think that obviously there are certain elements within the Iranian regime that are desperately trying to actually take on Israel. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this before we start wrapping things up here.
I think it's entirely possible if we hear about changes in positions, right, of political power soon in Iran, that this in fact was the main goal of the strikes. There was a collaboration with the Israelis. Entirely possible. We have to keep in mind, and yes, this was posted by unfortunately, I retweeted it personally, so this is how fake news can impact folks. But there was a fake letter released last year, actually, by the Jewish community of the Persian Jews, Jewish community of Iran, where in the letter they said Iran needs to strike the Zionists, and that these people do not represent Judaism. Again, it's this sort of two-faced model. We know the Talmudic Persian community most likely is assisting the Zionists, and their natural assets actually form a side. I don't know why. Again, it's unfortunately because Sunni and Shia Muslims view these people as the people of the book. And what does the people of the book mean? I'm not sure what book that's referencing, the Torah or the Talmud, because the Talmud was already actively, the books of the Talmud were actively used by the time of Muhammad. So I have a lot of questions as to what the people of the book literally signify. However, so these were natural assets within Iran. There's about 8,000 Jews living in Iran, in Tehran itself, but up to 100,000 in general. So less than Russia, but still an active minority community, which we need to just take into account. And no matter how many kafirs they appear in, right? Remember the famous clip where they appear before Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, and they hug him. They say, "We stand with you against Zionism." It's like, we know Zionism is only a tool. Zionism did not exist before the 1850s as a political ideology. Same as Marxism, it didn't exist before. It's simply an invented asset which these people can use and then later discard. Zionism did not exist when the Khazarians were trading, white pagan and Christian slaves around the Black Sea over 1,000 years ago. These people will utilize various political ideologies to essentially cause mischief around the world and to sort of forward their goals. And look, this quote from Rabbi Shmuley, actually, this is recently posted by him on social media. He states, Rabbi Shmuley, United States must get involved in this fight in order to protect the United States. God bless America and God bless the United States of Israel. Like, you can't get any more comical than that. And this is a guy who meets with former presidents, current standing presidents, all kinds of political people. Yeah, Rabbi Shmuley it's almost a caricature of even modern day Talmudic Judaism in a way. But I feel like he's simply the tip of the spear, the most outspoken member of the community. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But as you said, Conrad, the coup, there's a lot of people mentioning it. Raisi was in fact murdered. We have to come to that conclusion. Strelkov agrees, Pavel Gubarev agrees, a lot of Russians. The Russians completely are on board with the Raisi was assassinated in 2024 model. It wasn't a Kobe Bryant unfortunate helicopter crash into the side of an LA mountain situation. This was clearly a politically motivated accident, a tragedy that took place, unfortunately. And Raisi was very much on board. Him and Ali Khamenei were very good friends. They had the same aligned view. So yes, I think there's and look, Netanyahu's made it clear that the goal of Israel at the moment is to bring about regime change in Iran. It's not to, officially, it's not to expand Greater Israel. It's not to destroy Shia Islam. It's simply to force regime change. This would be, I think, the minimal position that they're going to bring about. By the way, they say this the same about Russia. They say President Putin must go. We're not for the destruction of Russia in and of itself. Yeah, some radical liberals say that, but they say President Putin is behind the entire SMO project. He needs to go. Maybe Patriarch Kirill as well, because he's such a hawk, allegedly, according to these people who sanction him. So again, this is the starting point. And then again, they push the Overton window further. They expand their bets, and they later want more. But I think the minimal that they're after here is for an overthrow of Ali Khamenei. And I'm not a supporter of Ali Khamenei's religious ideology, but he is openly at the moment one of the only people standing up against Zionism in the world, alongside the Houthis. So we just have to sort of give him props in that regard. And it's very interesting that despite all the threats, despite all the diplomatic pressure that's being put on him by his allied countries as well as the entire international community, the UN Security Council, he's an elderly man, right? So he's an old man. He's already old folks, they're stubborn, right? No offense. He's completely down to fight Israel. I think until the last missile runs out, and Israel and Iran has a lot of them stocked up. But that's my fear, Conrad, is that potentially if this escalates further, these people may move their goalposts, broaden them, and essentially aim to destabilize all of Iran for future generations to come. And we know Iran historically, it has fallen to foreign conquest before, right? Alexander the Great. We know the Babylonians conquered ancient Iran. The Macedonians, obviously, the Romans raided Iran multiple times, not just under Heraclius, but under Trajan, Hadrian, even Julian the Apostate won some battles against the Persians. There's been a lot of so-called Western and Eastern campaigns. Tamerlan, for example, the Mongols. Iran has been taken down as a state civilization before, and the Arabs. The Islamification of Iran also took place in the past. Literally, Arabs that came out of the desert of Arabia from Syria with their massive armies, they took down the old regime of Iran and they replaced it. And Iran came under the auspices and control of the caliphate. So it has happened in the past. If Iran falls today, will not be some unprecedented historical deal. I think the main danger of Iran falling today, as we said, is that Israeli factor. Is that prior to today, there was no predatory, eschatological, Armageddon set, you can say apocalyptic regime existent in the Middle East. Now there is, and we know they will be the primary beneficiaries if anything bad happens to Iran, which is why I think we need to stand for peace and for civility, but also we need to stand for the independence and sovereignty of the Iranian people. They need to continue existing in the Middle East in order for there to be stability, right? In order to keep this house together and for it not to all fall apart. And when it falls apart, demons begin to reign, especially in these particular places. And unfortunately, I think this is where, if Russia had a Tsar today, Conrad, I think, honestly, they would probably send more than S-400s to Iran. And we know this because Tsar Nicholas II had a very good relationship with the last two Qajariyim Shahs of Iran, especially the last Qajar Shah of Iran. He had his own Cossack Iranian Persian brigade, out of which the Reza Pahlavi, I believe, the first Pahlavi Shah, actually, who was a member of that Cossack brigade. The Russians had a very strong, wholesome relationship with the Persians, Iranians. They didn't want Iran to fall apart. And look, and this is completely speculative, but if Russia today was completely set on an orthodox understanding of geopolitics, the only thing they would want the Shia Muslims in Iran to concede on is that if the Muslims of Iran would allow for proselytism and missionary work of Orthodox Christianity within their country, I think Russia would literally give them almost nuclear weapons. If that was the trade, if you allow missionary work and for the opening of Orthodox churches within Iran, and for any Iranian to convert to Orthodox Christianity without active or some sort of acute persecution, then we will support your military, you will be an ally. But that's not the reality of today. It's all about money, wealth, and unfortunately very materialistic worldly considerations. So those are my 2 cents.
Oh, I think that's if we can hear, if we have anything like that in the future, I think we can say that things are going in the right direction. Because when it comes to the nothing ever happens pill, obviously right now we pray for peace, and in any individual situation, we don't want people to die. But the reason nothing ever happens, or the reason rather that things happening is generally good, is because if things continue as they are, then, many people will go to hell and have horrible things happen to them. I mean, the white race will stop existing. Orthodox Christianity will be threatened. Your children will be forced to live in these diversity LGBT hell worlds. It's only these prophecies and things actually happening and history returning and, things being fulfilled and, divine consequences sort of being meted out, that we're going to be able to see things change in any capacity that, will allow more people to, in my opinion, enter into eternity on the right side of things, as it were. So that's where all this comes from. But a few updates before we read the final super chats and then probably get on our way here. The fifth wave of Iranian strikes, that's what was hitting northern Israel. It appears that they have ended. The Israeli Army Home Front Command has said civilians can leave bomb shelters after Iran's latest barrage of ballistic missiles at Israel, but should remain close to them until further notice. I don't know how they know that. I guess the intel, I mean, some people say, oh, they know they was all planned. They already told them it's over at this point. So I don't know if there's more in store, if the Israelis are going to respond, but it appears that people are going to be allowed to start coming out of bomb shelters. And Dimitri, you said that even if more than Gaza and the West Bank, or even decapitating Iran and doing regime change, if that's the short-term goal, we know the long-term goals, as you mentioned, are greater Israel. And very recently, this was just the day before, on June 12th, an Israeli minister is calling for Israeli control over Syria and Lebanon. The heritage minister, Amichai Eliyahu, has sparked some new controversy in a speech to an ultranationalist youth conference where he called for Israel to have full control over both Syria and Lebanon, on top of annexing Gaza and the West Bank. Eliyahu asked the crowd, do you want Judea and Samaria? Do we want Syria? Do we want Lebanon? Do we want Gaza? Leading the thunderous cheers and him admonishing that the crowd needs to shout it out. The comments take on more relevance as Israel is already actively occupying parts of southern Lebanon and southwestern Syria, and the far right in Israel is increasingly advocating for its expansion of that. And we also know, of course, of the 22 new massive Jewish settlements that have been approved in the West Bank, as the Israelis continue to, cash in their check, their $250 million investment into the Trump campaign that allows them to fully annex the West Bank. So let's update the page here, see if we have any updates from this. It says the latest batch of Iranian missiles was the sixth to target large areas of Israel. So, very big things occurring here. This was by far the largest Iranian strike or set of strikes on Israel that's ever occurred. Reports on Telegram are saying 14 people have been injured in the strike. 2 individuals have been discovered underneath rubble unconscious. No fatalities have been reported at this time. No idea if that's accurate. Military censorship has, of course, been enforced in Israel. At this point, I'm surprised people might get arrested for even just posting videos and certain things that are going to be used by the Iranians to pinpoint air defense locations. But we now have footage of an Israeli attack on the Iranian Army's 216th Armored Brigade in the city of Zanjan. So again, I don't know how much this footage is, a few hours old at this point, but the war is very much still ongoing, and I'm sure the Middle Eastern airspace is completely closed still. I don't know when we're going to see civilian air and flights over this region in the future at all. But a few more questions here. Paisios, $5. Thank you all so much for the support. The financial support really, really helps us out. If you want to do more than just donate here, worldwarnow.co, please get behind the paywall for just $7 a month. Really helps us out. You're going to be able to listen to our new premium episode released tomorrow morning. So get ready for that. Paisio says, thank you guys so much for answering my question about Metropolitan Sergius. You're welcome. I cannot wait to hear your guys' opinion tomorrow morning. Indeed. $20 from Jonathan Kelly. What do the prophecies suggest about U.S. involvement in the coming conflicts? And it definitely suggests that the U.S. will be aiding the Israelis, that in some capacity, I believe when the Kemalists come to power, for example, in Turkey after Erdogan falls, that the United States will likely be aiding them. There is obviously also the chance that before that, Turkey and the U.S. come to blows somehow. Obviously, the U.S. is heavily involved in the Russia-Ukraine situation, and there are contingencies among the prophecies. Even Metropolitan Yofitos told me specifically that if things escalate in the north, with Russia having to escalate against Finland and Norway and Sweden, then we very much could see U.S. troops on the ground on the continent, large NATO forces deployed and clashing with Russian and even forces from their allies. I mean, we already know North Korea is going to fight on the side of the Russians. That's all been confirmed in Ukraine. So there are all sorts of possibilities, but whether it's boots on the ground, I think that's one of the biggest questions. But I think, as many have said in the chat, it may be less likely that the U.S. is able to mobilize a huge army due to natural disasters, economic disasters that are prophesied also to unfold here on the home front. So thanks for the $20, Jonathan. Your support's always appreciated. You're one of the top super chatters here on the stream. So big shout out. Thank you so much. And another $5 from Paisios. Please make sure you guys discuss the church persecution news. That's my favorite segment of the whole show. Well, ironically enough, there hasn't been that much news on that front. I don't know if you have any updates on church persecution this week, Dimitri, but not just because of these other things, but looking at all our sources, it's been a bit of a quieter week. Not that I think nothing is all has happened, but not as dramatic in that front.
No, definitely the loudest stories, and this has been covered by our good friend Father John Whiteford, by Orthodox Christianity.com, that great journalistic media source for all news Orthodox Christian. There's been a few priests actually detained, in particular priest, monk, and archimandrite of the Pachayev Lavra skate. Now, mind you, we'll talk about the Pachayev Lavra in a moment, but archimandrite Pafnuti was detained and actually taken to a Ukrainian conscription camp. So essentially they kidnapped an archimandrite. This has been the highest ranking member of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to be actually recruited forcefully into the Ukrainian military. And he was actually the leader of the Holy Spirit monastery skate outside of the Pachayev Lavra. Now, this has been, of course, this decision of the Ukrainian Zelensky government has been greatly attacked by all Orthodox Christians, by bishops in Ukraine, bishops in Russia, etc. It's completely unacceptable. They've been doing this to priests for the last year at least, essentially militarizing the forced conscription kidnapping process that the Tetsaka Ukrainian personnel, wandering around, taking grown men off of the streets, essentially stuffing them into vans, basically sending them to the trenches to die for Israel and for the greater Khazaria. And the significance of this, right, because the Pachayev Lavra, right, Archimandrite Pafnutius, where was this region located? Like, where was Archimandrite Pafnutius living? The Holy Spirit skate is just outside of the Pachayev Lavra, located where? 40, 50 kilometers away from Lvov, all the way in far western Ukraine. This is a territory that allegedly needs to be retained by Ukraine, even after the goals of the SMO have been met. And this is when we discuss the greater territorial integrity, and where I have to agree with Alexander Dugin. If the goals of the special military operation are to be completely successful, Russia would need to essentially take and administer all of Ukraine. All of it would need to be liberated. Why? Because otherwise events such as this will continue happening. The Orthodox Church will continue to be harassed. The persecution will continue because, look, this is hundreds of kilometers away from Kiev, from the Russian borders. This is exactly where they will aim to destroy Orthodox Christianity, out there in the Pachayev Lavra. And remember, a Lavra in the Orthodox Christian Church is essentially this massive, independent, honorary monastery, right? It's a very special role. There are less than 10 Lavras in the entire world. Ukraine being one of the biggest sort of Orthodox Christian lands, countrysides, Malorossia, Novorossiya. This land, formerly belonging to the Russian Empire, was Christian for over 1,000 years now, and so it has 3 Lavras, which is very rare. One in Svetogorsk in the Far East, one, of course, in the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, and a Lavra all the way out west, between the city of Rovno and Lvov. Just right between them, there's a Pachayev Lavra. You can read about it. I think it's worth reading about in terms of its history, the saints that have been there, many miracle-working icons. The Pachayev Lavra, coincidentally, is very famous for actually and look, I know people are skeptical about this in terms of the practice being performed, not the efficacy of it, but, let's just say a lot of exorcisms takes place at the Pachayev Lavra. It's been famous for this in the 1990s, early 2000s. A lot of demons have been exorcised at this Lavra. If there is a demonically possessed Ukrainian, where do they usually take them? Pachayev Lavra had a lot of elders who would pray over the demonically possessed people, and in fact, many demons would be completely exorcised. It was one of these, almost you can say every church is a hospital for the soul, but this was very much like an ICU of some, or like an emergency room. This is why the Ukrainians are harassing, I think, these priest monks who are located here. This Lavra needs to be shut down. And this is why Lvov, I think, despite all these rumors that, Lvov is very liberal, etc., yes, true. But Nicholas II annexed Lvov as well from Austria-Hungary in the First World War. Nicholas II, our saintly Tsar, never planned on, returning Lvov to the Roman Catholics. It's a long discussion, but the Pachayev Lavra is a very, very holy site to all Orthodox Christians around the world. And unfortunately, it's located very, very far west. So this archimandrite, we have to keep him in our prayers. Father Pafnutius, he's been kidnapped currently. Hopefully he is returned back to his monastery and the Ukrainians don't send them out to fight against the Russians in the trenches, which I think is absolutely insane. very unethical. The other priest that was detained recently, unfortunately enough, he was released after a medical examination, is Archpriest Alexander Zhuk. And where was he kidnapped from? Oh, from his home in Rovno. So right next to Pachayev Lavra and Lvov, again, out west in Ukraine. So this kind of does show you, like, Archpriest Alexander, Archimandrite Paphnutius, you can see the trend here. Western Ukraine also needs to be liberated, or at least it needs to be prevented from, persecuting Christianity of any denomination, but primarily Orthodox Christianity, which these people are aiming at destroying in these lands. And, I'm not sure if this will come to pass, but as you're listening to this live show, Kiev, Zelensky has planned to hold a massive gay parade in the city of Kiev on the 14th of June. So, yeah, let's hope Russia, doesn't stand down in these next few hours and, holds it down, sort of continues its to taking out certain military assets across the country, which it's fighting currently, in the special military operation. Because, let's just say degeneracy such as this probably shouldn't be taking place. And what kind of blessings, what kind of deities and demons is the Zelensky regime trying to summon up in Kiev to support itself? Clearly, it isn't. Zelensky's not praying to God here. He's calling up all kinds of other forces and spiritual, unfortunate beings. So it's this exactly paints a good picture of which side is correct in this greater battle, and which we've always stated for the past 2+ years. It isn't just materialistic, worldly. It isn't just two countries fighting over geopolitical, economic resources, economic interests, which we do cover on the show, and we will cover in the future. We'll have some very good 8-hour episodes dedicated to economics and the future of Ukraine, economically speaking, and some of its very key history. But battle is spiritual, right? And we don't say this with hyperbole. It literally is. So we'll cover this news every single week. Tune in, subscribe, support us, and we'll continue to bring only the best uncensored geopolitical content to you.
No, the church news section, we always bring it to you. There's always something going on, I don't think anyone else is doing it. No one else is doing a sort of video or audio or live show where they actually break down the latest in ecclesial news, persecution news, canonization of saints, these sorts of things. So we are happy to bring that to you because that stuff is just as important, if not more important. Frankly, it is more important than the day-to-day geopolitics things that we all discuss. But as we prepare to end the show here, we got a few more super chats. We got $5 from Pantalema, and I just wanted to give you the last super chat. But unfortunately, he was beat by $2 from Paisios, who says that I pray America will have a great Lavra. So do I. Thank you, both of you, for the super chats. But the latest, before we end the stream here, apparently in the latest strikes, at least 40 people have been injured in Israel. Iran claims that 78 people have been killed in Israeli strikes on their territory, 320 people injured. I believe Israel's claimed at least 3 people have died in the Iranian strikes. So we're going to be keeping you posted. Be sure to follow us on the social media. Follow us on X at @WorldWarNow_. Follow me on X at GnomeRad. Trying to get to 10,000 followers soon. I'm getting close, so please help me get there. Thank you all for the support. Follow Dimitri at WWN Host. Be sure to follow us on Telegram at World War Now Telly. Subscribe to us here on YouTube if you're not already subscribed. Please do so. Put the notifications on to tune into my weekly live streams, World War Live, every Tuesday evening at 7:45 p.m. Central Time. WorldWarNow.co. That is where you can find everything. That's our home base. All of our shows, all of our Ether Hour episodes. That's how you can get behind the paywall and do everything you can to support the show. So, we've got more money coming in. We've got $10 from Ghost750X1. I became a catechumen 2 Sundays ago. I'm going to ask my father about this as well, as I was wanting to pursue a higher education in IT. But in light of this, I instead should focus on something else. Well, pray about it. Talk to your spiritual father. Talk to your priest. Do whatever you can. Focus on reception and prayer. And I think God will guide you on what to do in the other areas of your life. Thank you so much for the support. Go ahead.
Just in light of that super chat, Ghost, IT in some capacity, whether it's hardware or software, it is the future of technology. So to have pious Orthodox Christians who attend church, working in the field, this is key, right? There are a lot of good Orthodox Christian IT tech people in Russia today, all kinds of Orthodox countries. So don't necessarily move away from that particular field because you feel that it is currently dominated by, anti-Christian influences. Like, we truly do need experts, actually, who are strong in the faith and who also work in that particular field. Because in some ways, it is the future of technology, unfortunately. That's just where the world is going. So thank you for all your hard work, and hopefully you make the right decision.
No, that's very, very true. We're going to need all sorts of technologists in the future here. $10 from Zach Flatton, good friend of mine. Thank you for the support, Zach. Any Ortho Patriarchs release any statements yet on the attack? Keep up the great work, guys. I haven't seen anything. I'm sure Metropolitan Neophytos has talked to his local people about this, but I've yet to see any patriarchal or synodal statements or even any official statements from any bishops at all. But the moment we see any of those, you will be sure to find them on our Telegram and Twitter and elsewhere. But unless you have anything else to say, Dimitri, we're ready to wrap up. Any final words you have for the people here on this fateful evening, as you know, the prophesied events that we've been talking about for years on the show have come to pass?
No, I think I'm not sure if praying for peace necessarily is we can do that, but I think pray that God is merciful upon the innocent people and merciful upon everyone, frankly, because we all deserve we all deserve things, trust me, especially me myself speaking as a big sinner. Even another super chat, but it's very important to keep the people of the Middle East in our prayers, because they're currently suffering under essentially these demonically inspired attacks. You could even see this in the tweet of Lindsey Graham, right, the American Republican, who stated that the game is on. It is a game for these people, right? He said, "God bless Israel." I personally can't be moved to say things like Ahmad Sila or God bless Israel. It's simply, I think it's apostasy. A little bit, I stand with the fact that the Middle Eastern people essentially need a peaceful place where they can coexist. There are so many different ethnicities. And my final thoughts that if before this recording and the next one, horrible things happen with the Persian people in Iran, if the powers of the world, essentially succeed in their goals, hopefully they will not, is that, I don't necessarily think that asylum seekers and refugees from Iran would be a detrimental cause. Like, we have to keep in mind, there were many countries which took in Russian Orthodox Christians who escaped Bolshevism and communism at the beginning of the 20th century. They didn't have to, but they did. And including China, Southeast Asia, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Americas, and even places in Europe, right? We can't necessarily look down upon all asylum seekers and refugees, especially those coming out of Iran. And I agree, even Tajiks to a great extent, they're also a Persian people. They are, a Persian ethnos in some capacity. They are related to Persians. If the region is destabilized, if there are Iranian Persian refugees, I'm personally not going to counter-signal them, frankly, predominantly. We know this is one of the goals, to destabilize the countries taking in all these asylum seekers. But keep in mind, these are very cultured people. They're not just Shia extremists. Many of them are very secular, very accepting. They've been very friendly to Christianity throughout the ages. These are very ancient people. In fact, are probably one of the most cultured people in the entire Middle East. Definitely more than the Zionist Ashkenazis out there in the Levant. So keeping that in mind, I pray for the Persian people. I hope they retain their sovereignty and independence, which they currently have. And if the worst comes to pass, I hope that many countries do grant them temporary asylum, and one day that they manage to return home. If the worst does, of course, come to eventuate, according to a lot of these American politicians, Conrad, who are clearly on the payroll, these members of Congress, the Senate, who are just posting the same thing: pray for Israel, destroy Iran, etc. I would just say it's very, very easy to condemn these people, so it's hard to keep away from judgment.
I totally agree. Final $5 here from Paisios. Thank you, Dimitri, for always trolling the neo-pagan race hustlers on Twitter. It's freaking hilarious. Well, that's something we can definitely agree with there. Final words that I have, I agree with what you just said, Dimitri. We got to pray for everything here. We have to be vigilant. We are getting a report of apparently something on Mount Athos. This was communicated to some Orthodox outlet. A monk on Philotheos stated, "Everything indicates that the prophecies of the Holy Fathers are approaching fulfillment. It is not a time for fear, but for repentance. The Athonite monks call on the faithful for inner vigilance, fasting, and prayer for peace." I think everyone should realize that. And again, if this stuff freaks you out or gets you scared, there's no need to be getting into the details if that's you. And again, I don't want this to be misinterpreted, but I think for many people, they should be joyful. They should be excited, because the fact that these prophecies are being fulfilled and were given us in the first place isn't just necessarily for repentance, but so we can realize that, the Holy Fathers of our day, the Holy Spirit has not abandoned us. It still enlightens holy people, prayerful people, elders, to the truths of our time so that they can communicate to us spiritual retards as we are, us spiritual infants like me, can communicate so we can better persevere in these times so that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel and so we can never lose focus on what's the most important, which is Christ and the spiritual struggle, so that even in the midst of these unfolding events, we can know that obviously God anticipated all of these things and even communicated many of these future realities to our holy people so that those with ears to hear could also be prepared and understand. So thank you all so much for tuning in. It's been an honor to broadcast during these fateful days. It's, they say, may you live in interesting times. Frankly, I would not want to be, or I would not want to exist or be alive at any other time than this. So it truly is an honor to be here with you all, getting closer and closer to the end of all things. Perhaps the return of St. John Baptist is on the horizon. Many other things are clearly about to come down, upon us. So stay vigilant, stay prayerful, continue to attend the services and receive the sacraments, and stay tuned to World War Now, because we are going to be following all of this very closely. And with all of that, I want to, again, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to everybody that financially supported us. I want to encourage everybody to visit worldwarnow.co and get behind the paywall. And stay tuned, of course, on the socials to stay in touch with everything. But most importantly, keep us in your prayers. Keep Metropolitan Neophytos in your prayers. Keep your parish priests, the monastics in your area, and all of the church in your prayers. And again, ask for repentance and heed the warnings of these elders. And with all of that, we will see you on the next one. God bless.